You signed it, Mom. You promised you would. I didn't think it was real, honey. I don't know what to do. I told you to stop calling me at work, Mom. Just wait until I get home. No, I can't talk right now. Your name is on a company financial guarantee. Did you authorize this? No. Someone used your name to guarantee a loan. I never authorized that. Mom, Did you sign my name to this?
My daughter had never spoken to me like that before. Mom, please stop calling me while I'm at work. You're making me look unprofessional. I stared at the certified letter on my kitchen table, my name printed beneath the words, Personal Guarantor. I'm sorry, Rachel, I whispered. I thought this might be important. I'll handle it. Then she hung up. I was 68 years old, and somehow my own daughter had made me feel like a child who needed correcting. 4 hours later, my phone rang again. Mrs. Cooper. This is Charles Whitmore. I'm Rachel's boss. I sat straighter. Then he asked the question that made my blood run cold. Did you authorize your daughter to use your name on a company financial guarantee? I looked back at the envelope. No, I said. I didn't. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've ever been hurt by someone you trusted most, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if you're comfortable sharing, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about family dignity and finding the courage to stand up for yourself mean something to you, please like this video and subscribe. I'd be grateful to have you here. The daughter I thought I knew. Before that phone call from Charles Whitmore, I would have defended my daughter to anyone. That is the part I still have trouble admitting. If someone had told me Rachel was capable of putting my name on a financial document without my permission, I would have looked them straight in the eye and said they didn't know my child. I was wrong. But I didn't become wrong overnight. My name is Vanessa Cooper. I was 68 years old when all of this happened, and I had lived in the same brick ranch house in Charlotte, North Carolina, for almost 32 years. It wasn't impressive by the standards Rachel had come to admire. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a narrow front porch. Daniel built himself one summer because he said every house needed a place where people could sit without buying anything. Daniel was my husband for 39 years. He died 4 years before that certified envelope appeared on my kitchen table. Even after he was gone, I still sometimes poured 2 cups of coffee in the morning. Grief leaves strange habits behind. Daniel had worked as an electrical maintenance supervisor for a manufacturing plant outside Charlotte. I spent 34 years in payroll and bookkeeping, mostly for a regional building supply company. Neither of us came from money. We knew what it meant to compare grocery prices, postpone vacations, and keep driving a car for 3 more years because there was nothing actually wrong with it. But we were careful. By the time Daniel died, our mortgage was paid off. We had retirement savings. We had no credit card debt. We had enough to live comfortably without pretending we were wealthy. And most importantly, we had given our only daughter opportunities neither of us had been given. Rachel had always been ambitious. Even as a little girl, she hated losing. When she was 9, she entered a school science competition with a model of the water cycle. She came home after finishing second, placed her ribbon on the kitchen counter and announced, "Next year I'm winning." Daniel laughed. I didn't. I saw something in her eyes that day. Not greed, hunger. I wanted to feed that hunger because I thought ambition would protect her from the struggles Daniel and I had known. We paid for tutoring when math became difficult. We drove her to debate competitions on weekends. When she was accepted into college, Daniel worked overtime for nearly 2 years, so she wouldn't graduate buried under loans. I still remember move-in day. Rachel stood in the doorway of her dorm room with tears in her eyes. "I'm going to make you proud," she told us. "You already have," I said. And I meant it. After college, Rachel worked relentlessly. She started as an administrative coordinator for a property management firm, then moved into nonprofit development, and eventually joined Whitmore Community Development. Whitmore had an excellent reputation around Charlotte. They rehabilitated neglected properties, worked with neighborhood organizations, and developed affordable housing in areas where families were being priced out. Rachel started there as a project coordinator, then project manager, then senior manager. Eventually, she became director of operations. I still have the photograph from the night she received that promotion. Rachel is standing between Daniel and me wearing a navy dress and holding a champagne glass. Daniel looks as proud as if she had been elected president. That photograph stayed on my mantle after he died. For a long time, looking at it made me happy. Eventually, it started making me confused. Because the woman in that photograph still looked like my daughter. The woman I spoke to during the final year before Charles called me often felt like someone else. The changes were small at first. That is how families miss things. Nothing happens dramatically enough to make you say, "This is the moment everything changed." Instead, you adjust, you explain, you forgive. Then one day you look backward and realize you have been walking downhill for miles. Rachel started correcting me. Not about important things, little things. If I said me and your father instead of your father and I, she would interrupt me. If I pronounced the name of a restaurant incorrectly, she would quietly correct me. Once, while we were having lunch with two women from her office, I mentioned that Daniel used to repair our appliances rather than replace them. Rachel laughed too quickly. Mom still thinks it's 1995. Everyone smiled. So did I. But something about the way she said it stayed with me. Another time, I stopped by her office because I had been nearby for a dental appointment. I brought her a container of chicken salad I had made because she used to love it. The receptionist recognized my last name and called Rachel downstairs. Rachel came into the lobby looking startled. "Mom, what are you doing here? I brought you lunch." I held up the little insulated bag. She glanced toward the elevators. "You should have called. I thought I'd surprise you." "Well, I have meetings. I'm not staying." Her face softened slightly. "Okay. Thank you." But she never hugged me. She took the bag and looked around again, as though she was worried someone important might see us. I told myself I was imagining it. After Daniel died, I became very good at explaining away loneliness. Rachel was busy. Rachel was under pressure. Rachel had responsibilities I didn't understand. That became my favorite excuse for her. And in fairness, she did have pressure. By 39, she was operating in rooms filled with developers, attorneys, bankers, donors, and executives who seemed to measure success by square footage job titles and the restaurants where they made reservations. Rachel began talking about positioning. Everything was positioning. Where you lived, what you drove, who saw you, who introduced you. She traded her practical sedan for a luxury SUV. She moved from a comfortable apartment into a sleek condominium near uptown Charlotte. When I asked whether the payments were manageable, she smiled. "Mom, you can't think about money the way you did when you were doing payroll." That sentence hurt more than she realized. I had spent 34 years making sure thousands of people received exactly what they had earned. I understood money very well. I simply didn't believe spending it was proof that you had it. But I kept quiet. I didn't want to become the mother who criticized everything her adult daughter did. Then her attitude toward my phone calls changed. Rachel and I used to speak almost every day, sometimes for 3 minutes, sometimes 30. After Daniel died, she called every evening for months. Then the calls became less frequent. Eventually, I noticed I was almost always the one calling her. If I reached her during office hours, she sounded distracted. "Can I call you later? Is this urgent?" "I'm walking into something." I adjusted. I stopped calling in the mornings because she said that was when executives scheduled strategy meetings. I avoided lunchtime because she often met clients. I tried after 5, but then she had dinners and networking events. There seemed to be no hour when being her mother was convenient. Still, I never imagined she was ashamed of me. Not until the Christmas reception at Whitmore. Rachel invited me almost reluctantly. She told me it was more professional than family. I wore a dark green dress Daniel had always loved. When I arrived, Rachel looked me over and said, "You look nice, not beautiful. Not I'm glad you came, just nice." Later I found myself speaking with a board member named Margaret Ellis. She asked what I had done before retirement. "Payroll and bookkeeping," I said proudly. Before I could say anything else, Rachel appeared beside me. Mom basically kept everybody organized. Then she redirected the conversation toward one of her projects. It was subtle, but I noticed she didn't want me talking about myself. On the drive home, I heard Daniel's voice in my memory. Never apologize for honest workness. That was what he used to say. A few months after that reception, Rachel began asking unusual questions about my finances. At first they seemed harmless. We were sitting at my kitchen table one Saturday morning when she looked around and asked, "What do you think this place is worth now?" "I don't know. You've never checked." "Why would I?" "Because Charlotte property values have gone crazy." I shrugged. "It's worth whatever someone pays when I'm dead." She frowned. "That's morbid. At 68, it's practical." She laughed but then asked, "The mortgage is completely paid off, right?" "Yes. And there's no home equity loan?" "No." She nodded slowly. I remember that now. That nod. At the time I thought she was impressed. Then she asked about my retirement accounts. Not exact balances, just where they were held. Whether Daniel had consolidated them. Whether I had updated beneficiaries. I teased her. "Are you planning my funeral?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "I'm trying to make sure you're organized." A few weeks later, she asked if she could borrow some of my old tax documents. She said she was helping me update emergency and estate information so things would be easier if I ever became ill. That sounded responsible. Loving, even. I gave her access to a file box containing old returns, insurance documents, property records, and copies of identification paperwork. She spent nearly an hour photographing documents with her phone. I remember standing at the stove making tea while she worked. I trusted her so completely that I never once asked why she needed photographs, instead of simply writing down the information. Looking back, that may be the hardest part. People imagine betrayal begins when someone lies to you. It doesn't. Betrayal begins earlier. It begins with the trust that gives the lie somewhere to live. By the summer, Rachel seemed more stressed than ever. She mentioned a major redevelopment opportunity involving an old textile property. "This could change everything for me," she said once. I thought she meant a promotion. "Then I hope they appreciate how hard you're working." She gave me a strange smile. "They will." I didn't ask what she meant. Then 3 weeks before the certified letter arrived, Rachel stopped by my house unexpectedly. She walked through the living room, glanced toward the front windows, and asked another question. "Mom, if somebody offered you a really good price for this house, would you ever sell?" "No, not even for twice what you paid." I smiled. "I didn't spend 32 years here because I was waiting for a better offer." Her expression tightened, then disappeared. "Just curious." I believed her. That was the daughter I thought I knew. So when that certified envelope arrived and I saw unfamiliar financial language connected to my name, my first instinct wasn't suspicion. It was concern for Rachel. I called because I thought my daughter might be in trouble. She told me I was embarrassing her. And that afternoon her boss called and asked whether I had authorized her to use my name on a company financial guarantee. As I sat alone at my kitchen table after speaking with him, I remembered every question Rachel had asked. The mortgage, the value of the house, my retirement accounts, my tax records. One by one, innocent conversations stopped feeling innocent. Then my eyes fell on the certified envelope again. For the first time, I noticed something printed beneath the lender's return address. A company name. Cooper Strategic Services, LLC. I read it twice, then a third time. My last name, my home address, and a company I had never heard of in my life. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether there had been a mistake. I started wondering exactly what my daughter had done. The envelope. I must have stared at the words Cooper Strategic Services, LLC for a full minute before I realized I was holding my breath. My kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. The refrigerator hummed behind me. A lawnmower started somewhere down the street. Through the window above the sink, I could see my neighbor's red geraniums moving gently in the afternoon breeze. Everything outside my house looked ordinary. Nothing inside me did. I placed the certified letter flat on the kitchen table and read it again from the beginning. This time I didn't read it like a mother worried about her daughter. I read it like the payroll supervisor I had been for 34 years. Dates, names, account references, addresses, legal language. I had spent most of my career learning that paperwork rarely lies by accident. People make mistakes, certainly. Numbers get transposed. Addresses get entered incorrectly. Forms get attached to the wrong file. But when several details point in the same direction, you stop calling it coincidence. The letter had come from Piedmont Commercial Lending, a regional lender based in North Carolina. The first paragraph referred to a pending redevelopment financing package associated with the acquisition and rehabilitation of an industrial property. That meant almost nothing to me. The next paragraph did. It referenced Whitmore Community Development, Rachel's employer. My stomach tightened. I kept reading. There were several entities listed in the financing arrangement, but one name appeared repeatedly: Cooper Strategic Services, LLC. I had never owned a company. Daniel had never owned one either. We had spent our lives receiving W-2 forms from other people's companies. Yet according to the letter sitting on my table, Cooper Strategic Services was involved in a multi-million-dollar redevelopment transaction. And then there was my name, Vanessa Elaine Cooper. Not just Vanessa Cooper, my full legal name. Underneath it were the words, personal guarantor. I whispered them aloud. Personal guarantor. I knew enough about financial paperwork to understand the basic meaning. If somebody borrowed money and failed to repay it, a guarantor could become responsible. What I did not understand was why anyone believed I had agreed to guarantee anything. My hands started trembling. I turned to the second page. There was a reference to verification of assets followed by language about supporting documentation. My home address appeared beneath Cooper Strategic Services, not Rachel's condominium, not Whitmore's office, mine. The same house where Daniel and I had raised her. For one desperate moment, I tried to invent an explanation. Maybe Rachel had used my address temporarily. Maybe there was another Vanessa Cooper. Maybe the lender had merged two files. But there weren't two Vanessa Coopers living at my address, and there certainly weren't two women with my full legal name attached to a company bearing my last name. I picked up my phone. Rachel's number was still near the top of my recent calls. My thumb hovered over it. Then I heard her voice again. "Mom, please stop calling me while I'm at work." And something Charles Whitmore had said returned to me. "Did you authorize your daughter to use your name on a company financial guarantee? Not, do you know anything about this? Not, is there some confusion?" He had asked a very specific question. I set the phone down. For the first time in my life, I was afraid to ask my own daughter for the truth. That realization hurt almost as much as the letter. I went into the hallway closet where I kept our important records. After Daniel died, I had organized everything into labeled boxes because grief made me afraid of forgetting things. Taxes, insurance, house, retirement, Daniel. The last box contained things I still wasn't ready to sort. I pulled out the house box and carried it to the dining table. The deed was there. Property tax statements, homeowner's insurance. The letter confirming our mortgage had been satisfied. Nothing looked disturbed. Then I remembered Rachel sitting in this same room months earlier with her phone. She had photographed documents from several boxes. At the time, I had thought she was helping me. "Mom, you need digital copies," she had said. I could see her clearly in my memory. Hair pulled back, reading glasses low on her nose. Phone positioned carefully over each page. Click, move the paper, click, next page. I had made tea. She had photographed my property records, my tax returns, insurance information, possibly even documents containing account numbers. I closed my eyes. "No," I whispered. I still didn't want to believe it. So I searched for the simplest thing first, the company name. Cooper Strategic Services, LLC. I wasn't especially talented with computers, but I knew how to search public business records. Years in payroll had taught me that if an organization existed legally, there was usually a trail somewhere. I opened my laptop. My fingers felt stiff against the keyboard. When the business registration appeared, I thought I had entered something incorrectly. I checked the spelling. Then I checked again. There it was. Cooper Strategic Services, LLC. Created 8 months earlier. 8 months. I leaned back in my chair. That was around the time Rachel had started asking more questions about my finances. I scrolled down. The mailing address was my house. My house. I actually looked toward the front door, as if the building itself might explain how it had become the address of a company without its owner knowing. The registered information listed a commercial filing service, so Rachel's name wasn't immediately visible. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me more uneasy. Why use my address but hide the person behind the company? I returned to the lender's letter. There was a telephone number near the bottom. I considered calling, then I stopped. Charles had said he needed to verify information internally before we spoke again. I decided I would wait. Not because I was passive, because I had learned something during 34 years of payroll disputes. When you suspect something is wrong, don't start by accusing people. Start by preserving what you have. I made copies of every page. Then I scanned them. Then I placed the original envelope and letter in a folder. Daniel would have smiled at that. Payroll Vanessa has entered the building. He used to joke whenever I organized something too carefully. Thinking of him almost broke me. I wished he were sitting across from me. He would have been angry. But Daniel's anger was rarely loud. He would have read everything twice, removed his glasses, and asked the one question I was avoiding. Why would Rachel do this? I didn't know. But I was beginning to remember things differently. Her questions about my mortgage, her interest in my home's value, her questions about retirement accounts, the documents she photographed. Then another memory surfaced. About 6 months earlier, Rachel had called while I was grocery shopping. Mom, do you still use First Carolina for your main checking account? Yes. Why? I'm updating your emergency information. I had laughed. You're more worried about my paperwork than I am. I just don't want to deal with chaos if something happens. At the time I heard concern. Now I heard information gathering. That distinction made me feel sick. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself water. My hand shook enough that the glass tapped against the faucet. I was angry, but underneath the anger was something worse. Humiliation. I had spent months worrying that I embarrassed Rachel. Now I wondered whether she had been keeping me at a distance, because distance made me easier to use. The thought was so ugly I immediately rejected it. This is Rachel, I said aloud. My daughter. The girl who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms. The teenager who cried when Daniel had surgery. The woman who held my hand through his funeral. People are complicated. But could someone who loved you also deceive you? I already knew the answer. Of course they could. Love does not make dishonesty impossible. Sometimes it only makes dishonesty harder to recognize. My phone rang. I nearly dropped the glass. It wasn't Charles. It was Rachel. For several seconds I simply watched her name flashing on the screen. Then I answered. Hello? Her voice sounded completely different from that morning. Warm, controlled, almost cheerful. Hey Mom, sorry I snapped earlier. Today has been insane. I swallowed. That's all right. Did you open that certified envelope? The question came too quickly. I looked toward the folder. Yes. A pause. Small, but unmistakable. Oh, okay. I didn't understand it. That's because it's business paperwork. It's complicated. Business paperwork. I had processed payroll reports, tax filings, benefit deductions, garnishments, audits, and financial reconciliations for more than 3 decades. Rachel knew that. Still, I said nothing. She continued. There's nothing you need to worry about. I'll handle it. The exact same words she had used earlier. I'll handle it. Rachel. Yes, what is Cooper Strategic Services? Silence. This time it lasted longer. Then she laughed, too lightly. It's connected to a consulting arrangement we're exploring. We, my team. It's boring corporate stuff. Why does it use my address? Another pause. We needed a stable mailing address when some preliminary documents were prepared. I probably used yours because I've had it memorized forever. Probably. My daughter was a director of operations. She didn't accidentally register businesses at addresses she probably remembered. I tightened my grip on the phone. And why is my name in the letter? Her voice changed, only slightly. Mom, please don't start worrying about language you don't understand. There it was again. Not an explanation. A dismissal. I wanted to tell her Charles had called me. I wanted to ask whether she had forged my name. But Susan wasn't involved yet, and Charles had asked me to give him time to verify the documents. So I swallowed every question. "All right," I said. Rachel exhaled. "Good. I'll come by soon and take care of everything." We ended the call. I remained standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed against my palm. She had lied to me. I couldn't prove how much yet, but she had lied. I returned to the letter and read the final page one more time. That was when I noticed a line I had overlooked. The financing package included supporting assets attributed to the guarantor. Among them was residential real estate. There was a parcel reference beside it. I knew that number. I had seen it every year on my property tax statement. I hurried back to the house box and pulled out the latest bill. The numbers matched. Cooper Strategic Services wasn't merely using my home as a mailing address. Someone had listed my actual house as part of the financial support behind the transaction. I sat down slowly. 32 years of mortgage payments, Daniel's overtime, my paychecks, our sacrifices. The home we had promised each other would give me security after retirement. Somehow it had found its way into Rachel's business paperwork, and I had never agreed to any of it. Her boss asked me one question. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the parcel number from my property tax statement printed beside the words supporting assets. At 2 in the morning, I got out of bed and checked the folder again. At 3:15, I walked through the house turning on lights for no reason. By 4, I was sitting in Daniel's old chair in the living room with a blanket over my knees staring at the mantel. The photograph from Rachel's promotion ceremony was still there. Daniel on one side, me on the other, Rachel in the middle. 3 people smiling as though nothing could ever separate them. I picked up the frame. "What happened to her?" I whispered. Then I corrected myself. What did I miss? That question hurt more. By 7:30, I had showered and dressed, even though I had nowhere to go. Old habits from 34 years of working made it impossible for me to face a serious problem in pajamas. I made coffee. I didn't drink it. At 8:17, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. My heart started pounding before I answered. "Hello, Mrs. Cooper." I recognized the voice immediately. "This is Charles Whitmore. We spoke yesterday." "Yes. Is this still a good time?" I looked around my empty kitchen. "Yes." He hesitated. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person if you're comfortable with that." That frightened me more than anything he could have said over the phone. How serious is this? Another pause. Serious enough that I don't want there to be misunderstandings. We agreed to meet at 10:30 at Whitmore Community Development's office. Then he added something unexpected. "Mrs. Cooper, Rachel is not aware I'm meeting with you." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Why not?" "Because at this point I'm trying to establish facts." That was a payroll answer. Neutral. Careful. The kind of answer you gave when you knew something was wrong, but did not yet know who was responsible. "I understand," I said. When I arrived at Whitmore's office, I almost turned around. The building was a renovated warehouse near uptown Charlotte, all exposed brick, steel-framed windows, polished concrete, and expensive simplicity. I had been there only twice. Once to bring Rachel lunch, once for a holiday reception. Both times I had felt like a visitor in my daughter's world. That morning I felt like evidence. The receptionist smiled. "Mrs. Cooper." "Yes, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." She led me past glass-walled offices and framed photographs of redevelopment projects. Families standing outside new townhomes, children cutting ribbons, old buildings transformed into bright apartments. Rachel had always told me Whitmore did meaningful work. Looking at those photographs, I believed her. That somehow made everything worse. Charles Whitmore met me outside a conference room. He was in his early 60s, tall, silver-haired, with the calm manner of someone accustomed to people listening when he spoke. "Mrs. Cooper." He offered his hand. "Thank you for coming. Vanessa is fine. Then please call me Charles." He closed the conference room door. A folder sat on the table. So did 2 bottles of water. No one else was present. "I want to be careful about this conversation," he began. "Some of what I'm going to tell you involves confidential company business. But because your identity and assets appear in documents connected to the transaction, I believe you're entitled to understand why I contacted you." I nodded. Charles opened the folder. Whitmore has been working for almost 2 years on redevelopment of the Franklin textile property. I recognized the description from the certified letter. I explained that the abandoned industrial complex had been vacant for more than a decade. Whitmore planned to convert part of it into affordable apartments community, retail space and offices for local organizations. It was one of the largest projects the organization had attempted. Rachel had been heavily involved. She's been excellent operationally, Charles said. The compliment hurt unexpectedly. I didn't want Rachel reduced to one terrible act. I wanted the daughter I loved, and the woman whose name appeared in those documents, to somehow be two different people. Charles continued. The financing structure is complicated. There are grants, private funds, tax incentives, and commercial lending. Then he turned a page toward me. Near the top was the name Cooper Strategic Services, LLC. My stomach tightened. What exactly is that company supposed to do? According to the documents submitted to us, Cooper Strategic Services would provide project coordination and certain consulting functions connected to acquisition and redevelopment. Submitted by whom? Charles looked at me. Rachel. There it was. No misunderstanding, no clerical accident. My daughter had submitted the documents herself. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. And what does that have to do with me? Charles slid another page across the table. Rachel represented Cooper Strategic Services as being financially backed by a private investor. I already knew what he was going to say. Still hearing it felt like being struck. You. I looked down. My full legal name was printed beneath the company information. Vanessa Elaine Cooper. Rachel told you I was an investor, yes. What kind? Charles seemed uncomfortable. She described you as a private family investor with substantial unencumbered real estate and retirement assets. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Then something almost absurd happened. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes the truth becomes so insulting that your body doesn't know what emotion to choose. A private investor. Charles waited. I worked payroll for 34 years. His expression changed. I'm retired. My husband was a maintenance supervisor. We saved carefully. That house is paid off because we spent decades paying for it. I have never invested in a redevelopment company. Charles leaned back slowly. That is not how the arrangement was presented. I gathered that. I hated how embarrassed I felt. Rachel had apparently reinvented me for people she wanted to impress. Payroll supervisor wasn't good enough. Widow with a paid-off ranch house wasn't good enough. So I had become a private investor. How much money are we talking about? I asked. The overall project is much larger, but the commercial financing connected to this portion is approximately $3.8 million. I stared at him. 3.8 million, yes. And somebody thinks I'm guaranteeing that, not the entire amount personally. The guarantee has defined limits and conditions. But the exposure is still substantial. How substantial? Potentially enough that you should have independent legal advice before signing anything. My throat tightened. I haven't signed anything. Charles became very still. Nothing. Nothing. He reached into the folder. What about asset verification? Number consent to financial disclosure. Number authorization associated with Cooper Strategic Services number. His expression hardened with every answer. Not toward me, toward the situation. Then he asked, did you authorize Rachel to sign documents on your behalf? No. Does she have power of attorney? None. Has she ever had authority to pledge your property? Absolutely not. Charles closed the folder. For the first time since I arrived, he stopped sounding like an executive. He sounded like a man who had just discovered something he desperately wished were untrue. Vanessa, I need to show you something. He removed several pages clipped together. These came into our internal file as part of supporting documentation Rachel provided. He turned them toward me. I saw financial information first, my address, an estimated property value, references to retirement assets. Then Charles moved his finger lower. My heart stopped. There was a signature. Vanessa E. Cooper. It looked like mine. Not vaguely, not badly. It looked enough like mine that a stranger would never question it. I leaned closer. My hands went cold. Charles watched my face. That's why I called yesterday. I didn't answer. I was studying the signature, the V, the long loop in Cooper, the slight upward slant at the end. Someone had either practiced it carefully or copied it from somewhere. I thought about Rachel photographing my documents, my tax records, insurance forms, old paperwork. Suddenly I understood why Charles had not simply assumed there was a misunderstanding. He had a document with my signature. What is this? I asked. A limited personal guarantee associated with Cooper Strategic Services' participation in the financing. And you believed I signed it until yesterday, yes. My chest hurt. Not physically. Emotionally, in that deep place where disappointment becomes grief. What did Rachel tell you about me? Charles hesitated. I looked directly at him. Please. He exhaled. She said you had supported her interest in independent investment opportunities for years. She said you understood the project and wanted to participate quietly. Quietly. That word almost destroyed me. Rachel hadn't merely used my name. She had built a version of me that explained why nobody had ever met me. Why I never attended meetings. Why I never asked questions. Why I never behaved like an investor. I was supposedly private, quiet, invisible, convenient. I looked through the glass wall toward the hallway outside. Somewhere in that building was my daughter's office. Maybe she was sitting at her desk right then. Maybe she was answering emails. Maybe she was telling people how busy she was. Yesterday she had told me not to call because I made her look unprofessional. Now I understood the cruelty of that sentence. My phone calls weren't the problem. I was. The real Vanessa Cooper did not fit the Vanessa Cooper she had invented. Charles spoke gently. There's something else you need to know. I turned back. The lender requested final verification because closing is approaching. That request is what triggered a review of several documents. I noticed inconsistency and decided I needed to speak directly with you. When is closing soon? How soon? Within days, assuming all conditions are satisfied. A terrible thought came to me. If you hadn't called, Charles did not answer immediately. I didn't need to. I understood. The transaction might have moved forward. My name could have remained attached. My house could have remained listed. And I might not have known until something went wrong. I looked again at the signature. Then something inside me shifted. For almost 24 hours, I had been frightened. Now the old payroll supervisor in me took over. I pulled the page closer. May I examine this? Of course. I studied the signature carefully, and that was when I saw it, the mistake. Small enough that Charles would never have noticed. Small enough that Rachel probably hadn't known it mattered. I had two ways of writing my middle initial. On birthday cards, casual forms, and everyday correspondence, I wrote an ordinary capital E. But on banking documents, property records, and legal agreements, I had used the same distinctive looped E for more than 30 years. Daniel used to tease me about it. The signature on the guarantee had the ordinary E, my casual signature, not my legal one. I looked up at Charles. I know where this signature came from. His eyes narrowed. How? Because it looks like mine. I tapped the page. But it isn't the signature I use on legal documents. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew something Rachel didn't. She had copied my signature, but she had copied the wrong one. I recognized my signature, but I hadn't signed it. Charles looked down at the signature again. To him, I'm sure the difference seemed almost ridiculous. One handwritten letter, one small loop, that was all. But to me it was the first solid piece of ground I had found since the certified envelope arrived. You're certain? He asked. Completely. I pulled the page closer. When I started working payroll, everything important was still signed by hand. Tax forms, bank authorizations, employee deductions, audit confirmations. You learn very quickly that signatures matter. I pointed to the middle initial. This E is how I sign birthday cards, delivery receipts, ordinary paperwork. But I don't sign legal documents this way. Charles leaned forward. How do you sign them? Different loop. Smaller opening. The lower stroke crosses back underneath. He studied me for a moment. That's very specific. It was intentional. I almost smiled despite everything. Years ago, somebody disputed a payroll authorization at work. After that, I started keeping my formal signature slightly different from the one I used casually. Daniel thought I was being overly cautious. My voice softened when I said my husband's name. Apparently, I wasn't. Charles sat back. Do you have examples at home? Legal documents? Plenty. Mortgage records, insurance forms, banking paperwork. He nodded. Don't send originals to anyone. Make copies. I know. That seemed to surprise him. I understood why. Rachel had apparently described me as wealthy but distant, perhaps an older woman who wrote checks and let professionals handle the details. She had forgotten what I actually did for a living. Payroll teaches you suspicion in a very practical way. If one employee says $20 is missing, you check. If 10 employees say $20 is missing, you stop assuming coincidence. I looked again at the false signature. Then a memory came back so clearly that my stomach turned. Rachel's birthday the previous year. I had given her a card with $200 inside because she had insisted she didn't need anything. I remembered sitting at this same kitchen table before her birthday dinner. Love, Mom. Vanessa E. Cooper. I had used the ordinary E. Rachel had kept that card on her kitchen counter for weeks. But there were dozens of other possibilities. Christmas cards, checks, delivery forms, medical paperwork, the documents she photographed after Daniel died. My signature existed in countless places. That was the cruelest thing about identity. We scatter pieces of ourselves everywhere because ordinary life requires trust. Charles gathered the documents. I need to involve our counsel. Am I in trouble? The question came out before I could stop it. His expression softened. Based on what you've told me, I don't see you as the person who created this problem. That wasn't exactly my question. He understood. My advice is to speak with your own attorney immediately. Someone independent of Whitmore, Rachel the lender, and everyone connected to this project. I already knew whom I would call. Susan Keller. Susan had handled Daniel's estate and helped us with property documents years earlier. She was calm, meticulous, and completely unimpressed by family drama. Daniel trusted her because she never told people what they wanted to hear. She told them what the documents said. Before I left, Charles asked one more question. Does Rachel know you and I have discussed the guarantee? No. Keep it that way for the moment. That sentence landed heavily. You think she might destroy something? I don't know what she might do, neither did I, and that was terrifying. I drove directly home and called Susan. Her assistant initially offered me an appointment the following week. I said, please tell Susan someone appears to have used my signature on a financial guarantee involving my house. I was transferred within 2 minutes. Vanessa. Hearing Susan's voice nearly broke whatever composure I had left. I need help. What happened? I gave her the shortest version possible. The certified letter. Cooper Strategic Services, Rachel, Charles. The guarantee, the signature. Susan did not interrupt. When I finished, she said, do not sign anything, I won't. Do not give Rachel documents, identification passwords, or account information. All right. Do not confront her yet. That was harder. She's my daughter. I know. I want to hear her explain it. And you may. But first we protect you. There was no hesitation in Susan's voice. Bring everything you have to my office this afternoon. I arrived carrying the folder copies of the letter property records and 3 older documents bearing my formal signature. Susan spread them across a conference table. She was 62 with short gray blonde hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain. She examined the guarantee first, then my mortgage satisfaction document, then an old banking authorization. Finally, she placed the signatures beside one another. I see it. Relief washed through me. So I'm not imagining the difference, no. She pointed. The formal signature is consistent across these older legal documents. The one on the guarantee resembles you, but the middle initial is different. Can that prove I didn't sign it by itself? Not necessarily. My relief faded. But it matters, she continued. Especially combined with your statement document history, and whatever records exist showing how this guarantee was created. I stared at Rachel's false version of my name. I think she copied it. Susan looked at me. Why I told her about the afternoon Rachel photographed my files. Susan's expression changed immediately. What exactly did she photograph? I don't know. Think. So I did. Tax returns, insurance papers, property records, possibly an old beneficiary form, a copy of my driver's license. When I mentioned that Susan put down her pen, you gave her a copy, it was in the file box. Did she photograph it? I think so. Susan wrote something on her legal pad. Today we're going to freeze your credit and contact your financial institutions. My face grew hot. You think she might have opened accounts? I'm not saying she did. I'm saying we stop assuming anything. That sentence became the rule for the rest of the afternoon. Stop assuming. We reviewed account access, changed passwords, added verbal verification requirements where possible. Susan instructed me to create a complete inventory of my financial accounts and property records. Then she examined the lender's notice more carefully. This is interesting. My heart jumped. What? She traced a paragraph with her finger. This appears to be a pending guarantee connected to financing conditions. What does that mean? It means the transaction hasn't closed. Charles said closing was within days. Exactly. She turned the page toward me. This notice looks like part of final verification. If that's correct, the guarantee may have been submitted, but the financing hasn't been funded. I stared at her. So they can't take my house. Vanessa, nobody is taking your house today. I released a breath. But if the loan closes, we're not letting it close with you, represented as a willing guarantor. For the first time since Charles called, I felt something stronger than fear. Possibility. Maybe I wasn't too late. Susan picked up her phone and asked her assistant to prepare a written notice disputing my participation in the transaction. Then she looked at me. I also want copies of every document Charles can legally provide. He said he would cooperate. Good. My phone vibrated inside my purse. Rachel. I stared at the screen. Susan noticed. Answer if you normally would. I hesitated. Then I accepted the call. Hi, sweetheart. The words felt strange now. Hey, Mom. Rachel sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. I was thinking I might stop by tomorrow and pick up that lender envelope. I looked at Susan. She wrote something on her pad and turned it toward me. Do not give it to her. I'd rather keep it, I said. Silence. Then Rachel laughed. Why? It has my name on it. Mom, it's really just administrative stuff. Then there shouldn't be any problem with me keeping it. Another pause. Longer this time. No. Of course not. Her voice remained pleasant, but I could hear tension underneath it. Then she changed the subject. We spoke about groceries, the weather, a neighbor's new fence, normal things. It was one of the strangest conversations of my life. After we hung up, Susan said quietly, she wanted the original. Yes, which means she knows it matters. I looked at the phone in my hand. A part of me still wanted Susan to tell me there was an innocent explanation. Instead, she returned to the documents. We need to establish where the false signature came from. That evening, I went home and opened every file box Rachel had touched. I compared old signatures for nearly 2 hours. Then I found it. An insurance beneficiary update from 3 years earlier. Not a legal contract, just an internal information form I had completed quickly at the kitchen counter. Vanessa E. Cooper. Ordinary E. The proportions matched. The angle matched. Even the slightly elongated tail on the R looked nearly identical. I photographed it and sent the image to Susan. Then I sat alone at the dining table. For the first time I allowed myself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. I simply put my face in my hands and cried for the daughter I thought I had. Because this was no longer about an unfamiliar company. It wasn't about a confusing lender notice. Someone had taken my signature and placed it on a document that could expose everything Daniel and I had spent our lives protecting. And all the evidence was pointing toward Rachel. 20 minutes later, Susan called. I compared the signatures. My heart pounded. And I agree. The guarantee signature appears extremely similar to this older one. I closed my eyes. Then Susan said something I hadn't expected. But Vanessa, there's good news. I almost laughed, where the guarantee hasn't become enforceable through a funded transaction. The financing hasn't closed. I looked toward the folder. So we can stop it. We can stop your assets from being used with your consent, because there is no consent. I wiped my face, and Rachel Susan was quiet. That part is going to be harder. I knew exactly what she meant. Stopping a financial transaction required documents. Stopping the damage between a mother and daughter would require the truth. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready for it. Why Rachel needed me. The next morning, Susan called before I had finished my first cup of coffee. "I've been reviewing the business records," she said. Something in her tone made me put the mug down. "What did you find Cooper Strategic Services wasn't created recently for this financing package?" I frowned. The state record said 8 months. That's correct. Which means somebody began planning this 8 months ago. I looked toward the hallway closet where I kept my files. 8 months. Around the same time Rachel had started photographing my documents. Can you tell who created it? The public filing used a commercial registered agent service. That makes the paperwork look more anonymous than it really is. But Charles sent additional documents this morning, and Rachel is listed as the managing member on internal disclosures. I closed my eyes. Even after everything I had learned, some part of me had still been waiting for another name. A stranger. A colleague. Anyone who could make my daughter less responsible. There wasn't one. Rachel owns it. According to the documents, yes. I sat down. Then why would she create a company while working for Whitmore? That, Susan said, is the question we need answered. An hour later, I was back in Susan's office. She had arranged the documents across the conference table in chronological order. "Forget the emotional part for a moment," she said. "Let's treat this like an audit." That was language I understood. The first document was Cooper Strategic Services formation record, 8 months earlier. Next came a consulting proposal dated 7 months earlier. Then preliminary project documents, then financial disclosures, then the guarantee with my false signature. Each page represented another step. Not one impulsive mistake. A sequence. A plan. Susan tapped the consulting proposal. This company was positioned to provide project coordination services associated with the Franklin textile redevelopment. But Rachel already works for Whitmore. Exactly. So she was going to get paid twice, potentially. I stared at her. Susan explained that Cooper Strategic Services had been structured to receive consulting fees if certain portions of the redevelopment proceeded. More importantly, later documents suggested the company might obtain a small equity participation connected to the commercial portion of the property. I shook my head. I don't understand. If the project succeeded, Cooper Strategic Services could benefit beyond ordinary consulting fees. How much? Too early to know exactly. Thousands, possibly much more. I felt cold. Rachel had told me the project could change everything for her. Now I understood what she meant. She had not been talking about a promotion. She had been talking about ownership. Is that illegal? Susan considered the question. Creating a consulting company isn't illegal. Participating in outside business isn't automatically illegal either. The serious issues are disclosure conflicts of interest, representations made to Whitmore and the lender, and of course the unauthorized use of your identity and assets. I looked down at my name. What did she need me for? Susan pulled another document forward. This. It was a lender assessment. Most of it was financial language, but one section had been highlighted. Liquidity, net worth, collateral support, personal guarantee. Cooper Strategic Services has almost no operating history, Susan said. It doesn't own meaningful assets. It doesn't have years of revenue. From a lender's perspective, it's a shell with an opportunity attached to it. So they wouldn't lend based on the company. Not comfortably. I understood before she finished. They needed somebody with assets. Susan nodded. And apparently Rachel presented you as that person. My throat tightened. How much did she tell them I had? The documents estimate the value of your house and list retirement assets within a range. A range. Yes. How would she know? Then I remembered. My statements. The photographs. The questions. She hadn't needed exact balances initially. She needed enough information to make me look financially credible. Susan pointed to the guarantee. Your debt-free property was particularly useful. Useful. My home had become useful. Not the place where Rachel learned to ride a bicycle. Not the house where Daniel carried her upstairs when she fell asleep on the couch. Not the kitchen where we celebrated birthdays. Useful collateral. I stood and walked toward the window. Charlotte's skyline rose beyond the buildings. Somewhere out there, Rachel was probably at work. I wondered whether she knew Susan and I were dismantling the structure she had spent 8 months creating. I keep asking myself why she didn't just ask me. Susan didn't answer. I might have said no, I continued, but she could have asked, would you have guaranteed a business loan, no? The answer came instantly. Susan raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps she already knew the answer. That hurt because it made sense. Rachel knew me. She knew Daniel and I had spent our lives avoiding unnecessary debt. She knew I would never risk my home on a company with no history. She knew I would ask questions. So instead of persuading me, she had removed me from the decision. Susan returned to the documents. There's another piece. I sat again. She showed me an email Charles had provided through counsel. It summarized part of Rachel's presentation concerning Cooper Strategic Services. The language made me sound like someone I barely recognized. Experienced private investor. Family capital. Long-term asset base. Strategic financial backing. She turned me into a resume, I whispered. Susan's expression softened. Yes. There was no mention of payroll, no mention of Daniel, no mention that my so-called family capital came from decades of ordinary salaries and careful saving. Rachel had polished my life until it matched the people she wanted to impress. But another question bothered me. If the project is so good, why does she need to do this? Susan nodded. That bothered me too. She pulled forward a financial worksheet. Rachel's company was expected to contribute capital before receiving its participation. How much approximately? $275,000 under the current structure. I nearly laughed. Rachel doesn't have $275,000. Apparently not. So where was it supposed to come from financing? Backed by me? Yes. The room went silent. There it was. The entire structure reduced to one ugly truth. Rachel wanted an opportunity she could not afford. My financial security made her look as though she could. My phone vibrated. A text from Rachel. Dinner this weekend, my treat. Feels like I haven't seen you properly in forever. I stared at it. Susan watched me. What I handed her the phone. She read the message and gave it back. Respond normally. I typed, that would be nice. Rachel replied almost immediately. Perfect. I have exciting news. Exciting news. I wondered whether she planned to tell me about the project after it closed. Maybe she imagined presenting me with money later. Maybe in her mind, that would make everything acceptable. That possibility bothered me because it allowed me to see how she might have justified it. Rachel probably did not wake up one morning and decide to steal from her mother. People rarely describe themselves as villains. She may have told herself the project was safe, that the guarantee would never be needed, that my house was only a number on paper, that she would make enough money to remove my exposure before I ever knew. Each lie would make the next one easier. Susan interrupted my thoughts. There's something else Charles wants us to understand. She opened an email. Rachel appears to have committed to bringing this financing into the project. To Whitmore, not exactly. Then who a development partner. The name was Mark Dalton. I recognized it. Rachel had mentioned Mark several times over the previous year. A developer, well-connected, successful. She had described him as brilliant. Once after 2 glasses of wine at Christmas, she had called him the kind of person who sees opportunities before everyone else. What did she promise him? Susan read from the document. Cooper Strategic Services represented that it had sufficient backing to complete its required contribution. I felt my stomach turn. So Rachel promised money she didn't have. Yes. And used me to make the promise believable. That appears to be what happened. I leaned back. Suddenly another memory returned. Rachel standing in my living room 3 weeks earlier. Mom, if somebody offered you a really good price for this house, would you ever sell? At the time, I thought it was curiosity. Now I wondered whether she had been calculating. What happens if her financing disappears, I asked. Susan folded her hands. Her company may be unable to meet its commitment. And then, that depends on the agreements. She could lose the opportunity. There could be financial consequences. Whitmore will have its own employment concerns. Could she lose her job? Susan looked at me carefully. Yes. I looked away. Despite everything, the thought hurt. This was my daughter. I had spent nearly 40 years wanting doors to open for her. Now I was helping close one. But then I remembered the false signature, my house, Daniel's overtime, the choice Rachel had taken from me. Protecting myself was not destroying her. I had to keep reminding myself of that. Before I left, Susan handed me a copy of this business timeline. 8 months of planning fit neatly onto 2 pages. I folded it into my purse. At home, I sat at the kitchen table and read it again. Company created. Consulting proposal submitted. Project participation discussed. Financial backing represented. Guarantee provided. Closing scheduled. Every step moved closer to my assets. Then I noticed a date. The guarantee had been submitted only 4 days after Rachel spent that afternoon photographing my files. 4 days. I stared at the date until the numbers blurred. That was no longer coincidence. My daughter had come into my home, sat at my table, accepted the tea I made for her, and photographed the documents she needed. 4 days later, someone submitted a guarantee carrying my signature. I wanted to call her. I wanted to demand an explanation. Instead, I remembered Susan's warning. Not yet. Then my phone rang. Charles. I thought you should know, he said. We've confirmed something about the development partner. Mark Dalton. Yes. What Mark says, he believed you personally approved the financial backing. I gripped the edge of the table. He knew about me. I knew the version of you Rachel presented. And what version was that? Charles hesitated. A wealthy mother who believed in her daughter's business instincts and was willing to finance her first major investment. I closed my eyes. Rachel had not hidden me from everyone. She had hidden the truth about me. And somewhere between ambition and desperation, my daughter had built her future around a woman who did not exist. A woman with my name, my address, my assets. And if Rachel had gotten her way, my signature, Ketuk Fan 6, the life Rachel was hiding for most of Rachel's adult life. I believed success had made her independent. I was beginning to understand that it had done something very different. It had made her expensive. That distinction came to me the following morning while I was sitting across from Susan with another stack of documents between us. I need you to understand something before we go further, Susan said. We're not conducting a criminal investigation. We don't have access to Rachel's private banking records. I understand. But the documents connected to Cooper Strategic Services tell us more than Rachel probably intended. She turned a financial disclosure toward me. There were references to obligations, projected contributions, available liquidity, and personal resources. Rachel's financial position wasn't described in complete detail, but there was enough. Enough to make my stomach sink. She doesn't have the money she pretends to have, does she? Susan looked at me over her glasses. No. That one word explained more about the previous 3 years than I wanted it to. Rachel's condominium had impressed me the first time I saw it. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white stone countertops, a rooftop terrace overlooking the city. She had laughed when I asked whether she really needed 2 bedrooms. Mom, this is how professionals live. Then came the SUV, the private club, the restaurants where I couldn't understand why a piece of fish cost $40, the clothes. Rachel had once been perfectly happy buying work dresses on sale. Now she talked about tailoring and designers and investment pieces. I thought her salary had simply increased. Susan pointed to one line. Her disclosed obligations appear significant relative to her income. How significant enough that she likely has very little room if something goes wrong. I sat back. So she's in debt. It appears so. I thought about every time Rachel had made me feel old-fashioned for refusing to spend money simply because I had it. Maybe she hadn't been laughing at my habits. Maybe she had needed to believe they were foolish. Because if I was right, she might have to admit she was living beyond her means. Susan continued. There's also evidence that she expected income from Cooper Strategic Services quickly. How quickly within months of closing? That explained the urgency. Rachel wasn't just chasing a future opportunity. She needed the project. Charles mentioned Mark Dalton, I said. Susan nodded. We've learned more about him. Mark was 46 and had spent nearly 20 years in commercial development. He had worked on several successful projects around Charlotte and Raleigh, though not all of them had gone smoothly. He was experienced, connected, and comfortable taking risks. Everything Rachel wanted to become. I had met him once. The memory came back unexpectedly. It had been at Whitmore's Christmas reception. Rachel had brought him over while I was standing near the dessert table. Mom, this is Mark Dalton. He shook my hand. So this is Vanessa. At the time I thought Rachel had simply talked about me. Now those words sounded different. So this is Vanessa. Had he already heard about my supposed money? Had he already been told I was backing Rachel? I remembered his expensive watch and easy confidence. He had asked how long I had lived in Charlotte. More than 30 years, I told him. Then you bought before everything went crazy, he said. Bought what? Your house. I laughed. Oh yes, long before. He smiled. Smart woman. That had been the entire conversation. Or so I thought. Now I wondered whether he had been estimating my property value while we stood beside a tray of Christmas cookies. Does Charles think Mark knew the guarantee was false? I asked. No. You believe him. I don't know him well enough to believe or disbelieve him. But right now, the documents support the possibility that Rachel misrepresented your involvement to him too. That surprised me. I had wanted Mark to be responsible. It would have been easier if some slick developer had manipulated my daughter. What did Rachel tell him? Susan consulted her notes. That you supported her becoming financially independent from her salary. That you believed in real estate. That you were willing to provide family backing for the right opportunity. I almost laughed. I once refused to buy a timeshare because Daniel calculated the maintenance fees. Susan smiled faintly. Apparently that detail didn't make the presentation. The humor disappeared quickly. Because Rachel had not invented those lies randomly. She had designed a mother that fit the story she needed. And the more I considered it, the more I understood why. Rachel had spent years entering rooms where she believed everyone else belonged naturally. People with family connections. People whose parents owned businesses. People who discussed investment properties over dinner. People who received help with down payments and introductions and capital. Rachel had received something different. Packed lunches. Tuition payments made from overtime. A used Honda when she graduated. A mother who taught her to balance a checkbook. A father who repaired everything until it truly could not be repaired anymore. We had been proud of those things. Rachel had once been proud too. Somewhere along the way, she had begun measuring our love against other people's money. I drove past her condominium that afternoon. I didn't plan to stop. I simply wanted to see it. The building rose above the street in glass and steel. I remembered helping Rachel move into her first apartment after college. Second-hand sofa, folding kitchen table, mattress on the floor for 2 weeks because the bed frame hadn't arrived. She had been so happy. Look, Mom, she said, standing in that tiny apartment. It's mine. Now she had more. And somehow none of it seemed to belong to her. My phone rang while I was parked across the street. Rachel. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi. Mom, are we still on for dinner Saturday? Yes. Good. She sounded relieved. Then she said Mark might join us. My pulse changed. Mark Dalton. Yes. You met him at Christmas. I remember. He's been helping with that redevelopment project I told you about. I see. Rachel continued casually. He's actually been a really important mentor to me. Mentor. Susan's documents suggested something more complicated. I kept my voice neutral. Are you two seeing each other? Silence? Then Rachel laughed. Maybe. Normally I would have been delighted that she was telling me something personal. Instead, I felt another piece of the puzzle sliding into place. How long? A few months. I thought about the business timeline. A few, Mom. What I can hear you doing that mother thing. What mother thing trying to calculate whether I should already be married? Despite everything, I laughed. For a few seconds, we sounded like ourselves. That almost made it worse. After we hung up, I called Susan. Rachel and Mark are involved romantically. She was quiet. That adds another layer. Do you think he pressured her, maybe? But Vanessa, be careful. About what wanting him to be the explanation. The words stung. Susan continued gently. Rachel formed the company. Rachel submitted documents. Rachel had access to your records. Unless evidence tells us otherwise, we cannot turn her choices into someone else's responsibility. I knew she was right. I hated her for being right. That evening, Charles called again. He had spoken with Mark through counsel. Mark claimed Rachel told him the financing was secure because her mother had substantial assets and fully supported her investment. He says Rachel told him you wanted her to stop depending on a salary, Charles said. I closed my eyes. I had told Rachel almost the exact opposite. For years I had told her that a steady paycheck was nothing to be ashamed of. What happens to Mark if the financing falls apart? He may lose money and time, but he has other projects. And Rachel. Charles hesitated. Rachel has considerably more riding on this. How much more? Her company made commitments. And there are employment issues we still need to address. I understood. Mark could walk away wounded. Rachel might lose everything. After the call, I stood in my bedroom and looked at the photograph on my dresser. Rachel at 22, wearing her graduation gown between Daniel and me. Her smile was enormous. I remembered what she whispered after the ceremony. One day, you'll never have to worry about money again. I had kissed her forehead. We already don't worry much. She had laughed because she thought I was joking. Maybe that had been the beginning. Not greed. Fear. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of returning to the world she came from. Fear that people with richer parents and better connections would always see something missing in her. I could understand that fear, but understanding is not permission. By Friday afternoon, Susan had assembled a clearer picture. Rachel's condo carried a large mortgage. Her vehicle was heavily financed. She had substantial personal obligations disclosed in the project documents. Cooper Strategic Services represented her chance to jump from employee to investor. If the Franklin project succeeded, Rachel could make more money than she had ever made in her life. If it failed, she had intended for my assets to stand behind her. I sat silently after Susan finished. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. Did Rachel ever intend to hurt me? Susan took a long time before answering. People can put you in terrible danger without wanting you to suffer. I looked at her. They just convince themselves the terrible thing won't happen. That sentence followed me home. Rachel probably believed the project would succeed. She probably believed my guarantee would never be called. She probably planned to make money replace the financing, and perhaps someday tell me everything after there was nothing left to fear. In her version of the story, she might even have imagined herself giving me something. A new house, a vacation, a larger retirement account, proof that she had been right, but she had still made the decision for me. That night, a message arrived from Rachel. Mark can't wait to see you tomorrow. I told him you're the reason I learned to think big. I read it twice. Then I put the phone down, because Rachel had never learned to think big from me. Daniel and I had taught her something much simpler. Build what you can afford. Keep your word. Never risk another person's security without their permission. Somewhere along the way, Rachel had decided those lessons were too small for the life she wanted. And now I was beginning to understand that the biggest danger wasn't Mark Dalton. It wasn't the lender. It wasn't even Cooper Strategic Services. It was the story Rachel had told herself. That once she became successful enough, the way she got there would no longer matter. I didn't confront her by Saturday morning. I had rehearsed the confrontation at least 20 times. Sometimes Rachel cried. Sometimes she denied everything. Sometimes I slapped the false guarantee onto the table and demanded to know how she could do this to me. In one version, I told her exactly what Charles knew. In another, I told her Susan had already begun protecting my accounts. None of those conversations actually happened. Susan called shortly after 8. Tell me you haven't confronted her. I haven't. Good. I'm having dinner with her tonight. I know. And Mark may be there, I remember. I walked to the kitchen window. So I'm supposed to sit across from my daughter and pretend I don't know she forged my signature. You don't have to pretend you're happy. That isn't what I asked. Susan sighed. Vanessa, we know documents were submitted without your authorization. We know Rachel had access to your records. We know she created Cooper Strategic Services. What we don't yet have is the complete chain showing how every document was prepared and submitted. And confronting her could change that. It could. I knew what she meant. Emails could disappear. Files could be altered. Stories could be coordinated. I hated thinking about Rachel in those terms. She's my daughter, Susan. Not some employee I caught changing timesheets. I know. Do you? Her voice softened. Yes. That's exactly why I'm telling you not to make decisions while you're hurt. That quieted me. During my career, I had handled payroll investigations involving people I liked. Once a supervisor I had known for 12 years manipulated overtime entries for two relatives. When the evidence appeared, I wanted to ask him why. My manager stopped me. Documents first, she said. Explanations later. I had repeated that advice to younger employees for years. Now I hated it. Documents first. Daughter later. Around noon, Rachel called. Change of plans, she said. Can we do dinner at your place? My stomach tightened. Why Mark got pulled into something. And honestly, I'm exhausted. I thought we could just order food. A week earlier, I would have been delighted. Rachel rarely wanted quiet evenings at my house anymore. Now I wondered why she suddenly did. That's fine. Perfect. Around 6, I'll be here. Before hanging up, she added. And Mom. Yes, do you still have that lender envelope? There it was. Yes, great. Keep it somewhere safe. I'll take a look tonight. After we ended the call, I immediately moved the original letter. I had kept it in my desk. Now I placed it inside the locked fireproof box in my bedroom closet. I left a photocopy in the folder downstairs. If Rachel wanted to take a look, she would not be leaving with the original. At 6:10, her SUV pulled into my driveway. She walked in carrying Thai food and a bottle of wine. For one painful second, she looked exactly like the Rachel I remembered. Jeans, simple sweater, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, no executive armor. Hi, Mom. She hugged. For one painful second, she looked exactly like the Rachel I remembered. Jeans, simple sweater, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, no executive armor. Hi, Mom. She hugged me. I almost cried. That was the terrible thing about betrayal. The person who hurt you does not stop being someone you love. We ate at the kitchen table. Rachel talked about ordinary things, a coworker who was leaving, construction delays, a restaurant she thought I would like. I listened and wondered whether she could hear my heart pounding. Eventually she asked, "So where's that letter?" I nodded toward the folder on the counter. She reached for it. I watched carefully. Rachel read the first page quickly. Too quickly for someone seeing it for the first time. Then she smiled. Yeah, this is what I thought. What standard lender verification? Why did they send it to me? Because your address is attached to some preliminary business records. You said that. She looked at me. You're still worried I don't like seeing my name on things I don't understand. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, then disappeared. Mom, nobody is taking anything from you. Interesting choice of words. I had never accused anyone of taking anything. What is Cooper Strategic Services? I asked the question slowly. Rachel took a sip of wine. I told you. It's a consulting entity connected to the project, whose several people are involved. That was technically true enough to avoid answering. Are you involved? She looked directly at me. Yes. Finally. How I helped establish it. Not I own it. Not I created it. Helped establish it. I folded my hands under the table so she wouldn't see them trembling. Why use my address convenience? Why my name? Her expression changed. What exactly are you asking? I could feel the confrontation rushing toward us. One more question and I might lose control. Susan's voice returned to me. Documents first. Explanations later. So I backed away. I'm asking because I don't like paperwork arriving here. Rachel relaxed slightly. I'll fix it. She reached toward the folder. I can take this with me. I'd rather keep it. Her hand stopped. Why for my records? Mom, you don't need it. It has my name on it. We stared at each other. Something passed between us. Not admission. Recognition. Rachel understood that I was no longer completely passive. She slowly withdrew her hand. Fine. Then she smiled. But the warmth was gone. After dinner, she insisted on helping clean the kitchen. I stood beside her, loading the dishwasher, remembering all the times we had done the same thing when she was young. At 14, she used to complain that I rinsed plates too thoroughly. You're washing them before the machine washes them, then they'll be very clean. She would roll her eyes. That memory felt cruel now. When the kitchen was finished, Rachel sat at the table again. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Where do you keep your driver's license? I stared at her. In my wallet. She laughed. I know that. Then why ask? I need you to bring it to lunch tomorrow. Every muscle in my body tightened. What lunch? I thought we could meet around noon. You just had dinner with me. I'm allowed to see my mother twice in one weekend. Normally that would have made me smile. Instead, I waited. Rachel continued. There are some insurance records I'm updating and I need to verify your identification. What insurance records? Just administrative stuff connected to your estate information. My estate. Mom, don't make it sound dramatic. She gave a little laugh. I told you months ago I was trying to get your paperwork organized. I looked at her carefully. Why does organizing my estate require my driver's license tomorrow? Rachel's smile tightened. Because I need identification verification. For what? An insurance update. What insurance silence? Then her frustration surfaced. This is exactly what I mean. My chest tightened. What do you mean everything becomes 20 questions with you? You're asking for my identification. I'm trying to help you. I didn't say you weren't. She pushed back from the table. You know what? Forget it. Rachel. No. It's fine. She stood and picked up her purse. I have enough going on without arguing about something this simple. I wanted to scream. Simple. My daughter had used my address, financial information, property details, and apparently my signature. Now she was angry because I asked why she needed my driver's license. But I stayed seated. I'm not arguing. She looked at me for several seconds. Then her expression softened. Mom, I'm sorry. She sat down again. I'm under so much pressure right now. I said nothing. If this project works, things are going to change for me. There was exhaustion in her face. For the first time, I saw how frightened she was beneath all that ambition. I'm close to something I've worked for my entire life. What security? The answer surprised me. You have a good job. A job isn't security. It was for your father and me. Rachel looked away. I don't want to work until I'm 65 and hope I saved enough. There it was. Not contempt exactly. Fear. She looked around my kitchen. I want choices. I wondered whether she understood the irony. She wanted choices badly enough to take mine away. Rachel left around 9. She hugged me again at the door. Lunch tomorrow, I hesitated. Text me the place. And bring your license. She smiled as though it were nothing. I watched her SUV disappear down the street. Then I locked the door and immediately called Susan. When I told her about the driver's license, she became very quiet. Do not give it to her. I wasn't planning to. Take it with you if you normally carry it, but do not allow her to photograph it or take possession of it. What do you think she needs it for? I don't know yet. That answer frightened me. The next morning, Rachel texted the restaurant. An upscale place near South Park, noon. Then another message arrived. Don't forget your ID. I promise this will make sense. At 11:30, I put my driver's license in my wallet. Beside it, I placed Susan's business card. Then I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. For days, I had felt like a frightened mother trying to understand what her daughter had done. That morning, something changed. Rachel believed she was meeting the same woman who had handed over tax records because her daughter said they were needed. The same woman who apologized for calling during work. The same woman who accepted I'll handle it as an explanation. She wasn't. I picked up my purse. Because I was finally beginning to understand something Rachel had forgotten. I had spent 34 years checking numbers people hoped nobody would question, and this time, the numbers belonged to me. The lunch. Rachel was already seated when I arrived. That alone told me something was different. My daughter was almost never early. She believed arriving exactly on time made her look busy and important, while arriving early made it look as though she had nowhere else to be. Yet there she was, 10 minutes before noon, sitting near the window with a leather folder beside her plate. I noticed the folder before I noticed her smile. Mom. Rachel stood and hugged me. You look pretty. Thank you. I sat across from her. She had chosen one of those South Park restaurants where the napkins were heavier than some towels I owned, and the menu contained ingredients I had to read twice. You didn't need to bring me somewhere this fancy. I wanted to. She smiled. My treat. The waitress came over and Rachel ordered sparkling water for both of us without asking. Normally that would have irritated me. That day I barely noticed. My attention remained on the leather folder. Rachel seemed determined not to acknowledge it. Instead, she asked about my neighbor, then my garden, then whether I had considered taking a trip. A trip you haven't gone anywhere since Dad died. I went to Charleston with Linda. That was 2 nights. It still required a suitcase. Rachel laughed. It sounded genuine. For several minutes I almost forgot why I was there. Then she leaned forward. You know, if things go the way I think they will, maybe we should take a real trip. Where Italy? I raised an eyebrow. You hate long flights. I'd survive. You complained for 3 days after flying to Seattle. I was 30. You were 36. She laughed again. And there she was. My daughter. The girl who used to call me from college because she couldn't figure out how long chicken lasted in the refrigerator. The young woman who cried in my arms when her first serious relationship ended. The daughter who slept beside me the night Daniel died because neither of us wanted to be alone. I hated that she could still make me feel safe for a moment, because I knew safety was exactly what she had taken from me. Our food arrived. Rachel barely touched hers. I noticed her checking her phone repeatedly. Finally, she turned it face down. Mom, there's something I want to talk to you about. Here it comes, I thought. All right. You know I've been working on a major redevelopment project. Yes, it's moving forward. I'm glad. This could be a very big opportunity. For Whitmore. A tiny pause. For everyone involved. She reached for the leather folder. My pulse increased. Rachel opened it and removed a stack of papers. I told you I've been trying to make sure your financial and insurance records are organized. Yes, these are related to that. She placed the papers in front of me. I did not touch them immediately. What are they? Mostly verification forms. For insurance, financial records, estate planning. They overlap. That was the first clear lie of the afternoon. Susan had taught me something over the previous week. When someone wants your signature more than they want your understanding, slow down. So I did. I picked up the first page. It contained ordinary-looking identification information. Name, address, date of birth. Nothing alarming. The second page concerned consent to verify certain financial information. The third contained language about Cooper Strategic Services. I stopped. Rachel. Yes. Why is your consulting company on my estate paperwork? Her eyes flickered toward the page. It's not estate paperwork exactly. You just said it was. I said these documents overlap. Explain how. She exhaled. Mom, Cooper Strategic Services is connected to a project I'm participating in. Some of the financial structures involve family assets. Whose family? Ours. I looked directly at her. You mean mine? Her expression hardened slightly. Technically, yes. I continued reading. Years of payroll work had trained me not to let official language intimidate me. Most complicated documents became simpler if you asked one question: what does this allow someone to do? Halfway through the packet, I found my answer. The authorization permitted Cooper Strategic Services and designated financial parties to verify assets associated with me. Another section referred to those assets as potential support for obligations connected to the company. I read it twice, then a third time. Rachel watched me. You don't need to analyze every sentence. I looked up. Why not? Because attorneys wrote it. Half of it is standard language. Then you should be able to explain it. Her jaw tightened. I can. Good. I placed my finger on this paragraph. What does this mean? Rachel glanced at it. It allows verification. Of what assets? Mine, yes. And this I moved to the next section. That's just authorization language. For what, Mom? For what Rachel people at nearby tables were talking softly. Silverware touched plates. A waiter passed carrying glasses. Our conversation was quiet enough that nobody noticed anything. Inside me, however, something was breaking open. Rachel leaned closer. It allows certain assets to be referenced as financial support. Pledged, not exactly. Potentially pledged. Her eyes met mine. It's more complicated than that. No, sweetheart. I think it's becoming very simple. The word sweetheart affected her. For a second, pain crossed her face. Then frustration replaced it. Why are you acting like I'm trying to hurt you? I nearly laughed. Instead, I closed the packet. I'm not signing this. Rachel stared at me. What I said, I'm not signing it. You haven't even read everything. I've read enough. Her voice lowered. Mom, this is important. To whom? To me. Finally. The truth, even if only 3 words of it. I nodded. I know. Rachel froze. What does that mean? It means I understand this matters to you. She studied my face. For one terrifying moment, I thought she knew about Charles. Then she relaxed slightly. This project could change my life. You said that. It could change yours too. My life doesn't need changing. That's because you don't understand what's possible. There it was again. That gentle condescension. The suggestion that my contentment was ignorance. I understand what I have. Mom, you have a house and retirement accounts. Yes. You could make your assets work for you. They already work for me. They let me sleep at night. Rachel pushed her plate away. You're being difficult. I'm being careful. With me? With my name. That landed between us. Her eyes narrowed. Then she said something I will never forget. This is exactly why I can't involve you in important things. I felt the words physically. For a moment I wasn't 68. I was the mother who had sat beside her hospital bed when she had pneumonia at 6. The mother who worked overtime when tuition increased. The mother who wrote checks for textbooks and pretended the cost didn't scare me. I looked at the woman across from me and wondered when my caution had become stupidity in her eyes. I could have ended everything right there. I could have said Charles called me. Susan has the guarantee. I know about the signature. I know about my house. Instead, I heard Susan's voice. Documents first, explanations later. So I remained calm. If something is important enough to require my signature, I said, then it is important enough for me to understand. Rachel looked away. You don't trust me. The accusation almost worked. Mothers are trained by love to respond to that sentence. Of course I trust you. What do you need? Where do I sign? But trust was exactly what had brought us here. I trust myself enough not to sign something I don't understand. Her face changed. I saw anger, then fear, then calculation. She reached for the papers. I placed my hand on them first. I'm taking these home. No. The word came too quickly. We both heard it. Rachel immediately softened her voice. They're internal documents. They have my name on them. I can send you copies. These will do. Mom, if there's nothing wrong with them, why can't I keep them? She had no answer. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Rachel released the folder. Fine. I placed the papers inside my purse. She looked toward the window. Lunch was over, although neither of us said so. When the bill came, Rachel paid. Outside the restaurant, she stood beside me near the curb. Did you bring your driver's license? I looked at her. Yes. Can I photograph it? No. Her eyes closed briefly. Why? Because I don't know what you need it for. I explained that. No. You repeated the word verification. Rachel shook her head. I don't know what's happened to you. I almost told her. Instead, I said maybe I started reading. She stared at me. Then she got into her SUV without hugging me goodbye. I watched her drive away. My hands began shaking only after she disappeared. I called Susan from the parking lot. I have the papers. Good. Bring them here. 40 minutes later, Susan was reading the packet. She became more serious with every page. Finally, she looked up. You were right not to sign. What exactly would it have done? It would have given them legitimate authorization to verify your assets and potentially support representations already made about your involvement. So this was supposed to fix the earlier paperwork. It could have helped create the appearance that you were now knowingly participating. I felt sick. Rachel hadn't invited me to lunch because she missed me. She needed my real signature. The false one had gotten her this far. Now she needed the genuine article to carry her across the finish line. Susan continued examining the packet. Then she stopped. Vanessa, what this transaction is weaker than Rachel realizes. How she tapped a section referencing my property. Because these documents assume you personally control all of the assets being represented. I do. Not exactly. I frowned. Susan looked at me carefully. Do you remember the estate planning Daniel insisted on several years before he died? A memory stirred. Trust documents. Beneficiary discussions. Daniel sitting in Susan's office asking endless questions. I remember some of it. Then tomorrow, Susan said we need to look at exactly what your husband put in place. And from the expression on her face, I knew Daniel had left behind something Rachel had never bothered to understand. What my husband had warned me about. Daniel had been gone 4 years, but the next morning I could hear him as clearly as if he were sitting beside me in Susan's conference room. Read the boring part, Ness. That was what he used to say whenever we signed anything important. The boring part was what Daniel called the pages everyone wanted to skip. Definitions, restrictions, beneficiary language, exceptions. The paragraphs printed in smaller type that made most people impatient. Daniel read all of them. I used to tease him about it. You're buying homeowners insurance, not negotiating world peace. And Daniel would tap the paper and say, nobody gets hurt by understanding what they signed. I wish Rachel had remembered that about her father. More importantly, I wished she had understood that some of the documents Daniel insisted on creating years earlier were about to become the strongest protection I had. Susan entered carrying a thick file. I recognized it immediately. Cooper Family Estate Plan. Seeing Daniel's handwriting on an old yellow note attached to the front nearly undid me. Susan sat across from me. You and Daniel completed this planning 7 years before he died. I remember. How much I gave her a tired smile. Enough to remember arguing with him about how complicated he was making everything. Susan almost smiled. He was thorough. That is attorney language for stubborn. That too. She opened the file. After Daniel's father died, his family had spent nearly 2 years fighting over a small piece of property. Nothing about the inheritance was especially valuable. That was what bothered Daniel most. He watched siblings stop speaking over land worth less than some new cars. Afterward, he became almost obsessive about keeping our affairs clear. We're not leaving Rachel a puzzle, he told me. At the time, Rachel was in her early 30s. Neither of us imagined the person we might someday need protection from would be her. Susan removed several documents. Your house remained titled in your names during Daniel's lifetime. After his death, ownership passed according to the estate structure we established. I nodded slowly. And it means your interest is protected more carefully than the financing paperwork suggests. She showed me the relevant provisions. I had the right to live in the house. I retained substantial control over it. But certain transactions affecting the property required formal procedures that had not occurred. No casual signature copied onto a business guarantee could magically convert the house into available collateral. I felt something inside me loosen. So Rachel can't pledge the house, Rachel certainly cannot. Could I? Under the right circumstances and procedures, you have options. But not through what was submitted here. Susan tapped the financing documents. These papers oversimplify your ownership and authority. I thought about Rachel asking whether the mortgage was paid. That was all she had cared about. Debt-free. valuable, available. She had never asked how Daniel and I structured ownership after his death. She assumed a paid-off house was simply a pile of money with walls around it. What happens when the lender discovers this? They won't treat the property the way Rachel expected. A strange mixture of relief and sadness moved through me. Daniel had protected me without knowing I would need protection. Susan continued. There's also the retirement structure. That part I remembered more clearly. Daniel and I had consolidated several accounts and placed part of our savings under arrangements designed to prevent careless transfers and simplify inheritance. Rachel was beneficiary to portions eventually, but beneficiary did not mean owner. That distinction suddenly mattered very much. She thinks everything becomes hers someday anyway, I said. Susan looked at me. Has she said that not directly? But I remembered dozens of small comments. When you're gone, I'll probably sell the house. Someday I'll have to deal with all these boxes. You should consolidate things so I don't have a mess later. I had heard practicality. Now I wondered whether Rachel had begun mentally inheriting my life while I was still living it. Susan seemed to read my expression. Vanessa, future inheritance does not create present authority. I know. Emotionally, too. That was harder. I looked down at Daniel's signature. I think I forgot. Susan turned another page. There was a memorandum Daniel had asked her to keep with the estate documents. Not legally dramatic, not a secret will, just notes from our planning meeting. Susan handed it to me. One sentence had been underlined. Neither spouse should guarantee Rachel's future business ventures using the residence or retirement security without independent review. I stared at it. Why did he write this? You both discussed it. I don't remember. You might not. Rachel was talking about starting a business at the time. Then I remembered. She had been 31 and briefly obsessed with opening a property management company with a friend. Nothing came of it. Daniel had been worried. She's too willing to believe confidence is the same thing as a plan, he had told me. I defended her. She's ambitious. I know. You make that sound dangerous. No. I think ambition is gasoline. Useful if you know where you're going. That was Daniel. Never dramatic, just stubbornly sensible. I read the sentence again. Independent review. He had not said never help Rachel. He had said never risk our security without understanding the risk. Exactly what Rachel had tried to prevent me from doing. My eyes filled. I wish he were here. Susan waited quietly. He would be so disappointed. Probably. I looked up, surprised by her directness. Susan continued gently. But he would also tell you to deal with the problem in front of you, instead of mourning the daughter you wish were sitting there. I laughed through my tears. That sounds like him. We spent the next hour comparing Rachel's financing documents with my actual estate structure. The more Susan explained, the clearer it became. Rachel's plan had been built on assumptions. That I owned everything simply, that I could pledge everything easily, that my signature would be enough, that no one would ask questions until after closing. She had mistaken my lack of sophistication about her project for a lack of sophistication about my own life. That mistake might save me. Around noon, Charles called. Susan put him on speaker. We've identified problems with the asset representations, she told him. What kind? The residence listed as support cannot be treated as Rachel's documents suggest. Vanessa's estate structure imposes requirements that have not been satisfied. Charles exhaled. So the financial backing is weaker than represented, significantly, and the retirement assets also not available in the way Cooper Strategic Services appears to assume. Silence. Then Charles said, the lender is going to have serious concerns. I spoke. When is closing? 3 business days. 3 days. Rachel was 3 days away from the moment she believed would change her life. Does she know there's a problem? Not the full extent. My stomach tightened. Charles continued. She knows additional verification was requested. That may explain why she tried to obtain your signature yesterday. Susan and I exchanged a look. What happens now? I asked. We pause anything relying on your participation. And Rachel, I need to address internal issues with her. I looked at Daniel's memorandum. Not yet. Charles hesitated. Why? Because I want to understand everything before she knows what I know. Susan nodded slightly. Charles agreed. After the call, I drove home with copies of Daniel's notes in my purse. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. For days I had looked at it as something threatened. Now I saw what it really was. 32 years. Daniel replacing the porch railing. Rachel drawing with sidewalk chalk on the driveway. Christmas mornings. Funerals. Birthdays. Arguments. Ordinary Tuesdays. A life. Not collateral. I walked inside and placed Daniel's memorandum on the kitchen table beside Rachel's unsigned documents, past and present, protection and betrayal. Then my phone rang. Rachel, I answered. Hi. Her voice was tense. Mom, I need to ask you something. All right. Did anyone from Whitmore contact you? My heartbeat quickened. I looked at Daniel's handwriting. Why would they? A pause. There's been some confusion around the project. What kind of confusion? Nothing serious. I almost smiled. Nothing serious had become Rachel's favorite description for everything serious. She continued, I just need to know whether Charles or anyone else called you. I thought about the conference room, the false guarantee, the lender, the house. Then I said carefully, why is there something you're worried they might tell me? Silence. Long enough that I could hear Rachel breathing. Finally, she said no. One word, one lie. Then she changed the subject. After we hung up, I remained at the table. Rachel knew something was wrong. She didn't know how much. She didn't know Susan had the unsigned authorization. She didn't know Charles had spoken to me. And she definitely did not know that the financial foundation beneath her plan was already collapsing. Most of all, she didn't know that the father she had once accused of worrying too much had protected the house years before she ever thought of using it. Daniel had been right. The boring part mattered. And in 3 days, Rachel was going to discover just how much. The meeting Rachel never expected me to attend. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 9. Charles called me Monday afternoon. We need to resolve this before the lender makes a final decision, he said. Does Rachel know she knows there's a meeting? That isn't what I asked. Charles paused. No, she doesn't know you'll be there. I looked across my kitchen at Daniel's old chair. For days I had imagined confronting Rachel. Now that the moment was actually coming, I wanted to avoid it. That surprised me. I wasn't afraid of Rachel. I was afraid of what would happen after the truth was spoken aloud. As long as Rachel didn't know that I knew there was still a strange space between us, where I could remember the daughter I trusted. Once I walked into that conference room, that space would disappear. Susan attended with me. We arrived 15 minutes early. Charles met us downstairs and took us to a larger conference room than the one we had used before. There were 6 chairs around a long table. Folders had been placed at each seat. A screen on the wall displayed the Franklin Textile Redevelopment logo. I hated how ordinary everything looked. Life-changing moments should happen somewhere dramatic. Instead, mine happened under fluorescent lights beside a tray of bottled water. Charles sat at the head of the table. Susan took the chair beside me. You don't need to argue, she whispered. I know. Answer questions. Stick to facts. I know. And if you need a break, ask for one. I nodded. At 8:55, 2 people entered. One was Whitmore's attorney, whom Charles introduced as Michael Grant. The other was a representative from Piedmont Commercial Lending named Karen Wallace. Karen shook my hand carefully. Mrs. Cooper, thank you for coming. I wondered whether she felt embarrassed. Her company had nearly accepted documents carrying a signature I had never written. Then footsteps sounded in the hallway. My heart began pounding. The door opened. Rachel walked in first. Mark Dalton followed her. Rachel was wearing a charcoal suit and carrying her laptop. She was speaking over her shoulder to Mark. If we can get them comfortable with the verification, we should still. Then she saw me. She stopped. Completely. For perhaps 3 seconds, nobody moved. Rachel's eyes went from me to Susan, then to Charles, then back to me. Mom, I had imagined this moment so many times. I thought I would feel powerful. I didn't. I felt sad. Hello, Rachel. What are you doing here? Charles stood. Please sit down. Rachel didn't move. Charles, why is my mother here? Because Mrs. Cooper is named in documents connected to this transaction. Rachel's face lost color. Mark looked at her, then at me. I could almost see him beginning to understand that something was wrong. Rachel finally sat. Mark took the chair beside her. Charles closed the door. I want everyone to understand that this meeting is intended to establish facts before any further action is taken on the financing. Rachel opened her mouth. Charles raised one hand. You'll have an opportunity to respond. Then he looked at me. Vanessa, would you explain when you first became aware of Cooper's strategic services? Rachel's eyes locked onto mine. I answered. When I received a certified letter from Piedmont Commercial Lending. When last week? Had you heard of Cooper Strategic Services before that, Num? Rachel shifted in her chair. Mark frowned. Charles continued. Did you authorize your home address to be used as the company's business address? No. Did you authorize anyone to represent you as a financial backer of Cooper Strategic Services, Num? Did you agree to pledge or offer your home as financial support? Num. Rachel finally interrupted. That's not what the documents mean. Susan spoke calmly. Rachel, please allow her to finish. Rachel looked at Susan as if she had forgotten she was there. Charles placed a copy of the guarantee on the table. Did you sign this? No. Mark turned sharply toward Rachel. She stared at the document. Then she looked at me. Mom, we discussed the project. We did not discuss me guaranteeing anything. We discussed family investment. No, Rachel. You asked what my house was worth. That's not fair. What isn't fair? You're making casual conversations sound suspicious because you're upset. For the first time, anger rose above my sadness. I opened my purse. Susan touched my arm lightly, reminding me to stay calm. I removed the certified letter and placed it on the table. Then I placed the unsigned authorization Rachel had given me at lunch beside it. This was casual too. Rachel stared at the papers. Nobody spoke. I continued. You told me these were insurance and estate documents. They overlap with financial verification. You told me to bring my driver's license for identification, so you could photograph it. Rachel's jaw tightened. I was trying to complete paperwork. What paperwork? Silence. Mark leaned away from her. Rachel. She turned. What you told me your mother had already approved the backing. Rachel's face changed. I said she supported me. You said she approved it. I believed she would. The room became very still. Karen Wallace spoke for the first time. Believing someone will approve a guarantee is not the same as obtaining authorization. Rachel turned toward her. The guarantee was preliminary. Karen slid the document forward. It was submitted as executed. Rachel said nothing. My hands were cold beneath the table. Charles looked at her. Who provided the signature? Rachel swallowed. I don't remember the exact document workflow. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rachel. She looked at me. You remember? Her eyes filled. Mom, please. No. My voice remained quiet. You told me not to call you because I made you look unprofessional. Then I discovered you had told these people I was a private investor. That isn't… You told them I understood this project. I thought you would. You told them I wanted to support it. I knew you wanted me to succeed. That is not the same thing. My voice cracked. I wanted you to succeed, Rachel. I never told you that you could use my house to do it. She looked away. Charles gave Karen a slight nod. Karen opened another folder. There's an additional issue. Rachel looked at her. What the lender completed final direct verification yesterday morning. Rachel frowned. With whom? With Mrs. Cooper, through counsel. Rachel turned toward me again. Karen continued. As a result, no funds were released. Mark sat forward. What do you mean no funds were released? The transaction was scheduled to move into funding subject to final conditions. Once Mrs. Cooper disputed her participation, we placed an immediate hold on all components relying on her guarantee or asset support. Rachel's face went white. How long is the hold? Karen did not soften the answer. This is not a temporary documentation delay. We cannot proceed on the basis presented. Rachel looked at Charles. We can restructure. Perhaps the broader project can, Charles said. But Cooper Strategic Services cannot remain in its current position. Charles, please. We also have an internal conflict of interest issue that must be addressed. Rachel looked around the table. I could see her world collapsing in real time. The promotion, the project, the money, Mark, the identity she had spent years constructing. For a brief moment, I wanted to save her. That instinct frightened me. Even after everything, my first impulse was still to protect my child from consequences she had created. Then Rachel looked at me. You called the lender no. You stopped the funding. I told the truth when they asked whether I authorized my name and assets. You knew what that would do. There it was. Not remorse. Blame. Something inside me hardened. I knew what your documents could do to me. Rachel shook her head. You don't understand how much I have invested in this. No, sweetheart. My voice was barely above a whisper. You didn't understand how much I had invested in what you were willing to risk. She stared at me. I thought about Daniel. 34 years of my paychecks. 39 years of marriage. 32 years in that house. Everything Rachel had reduced to numbers on a financial statement. Mark broke the silence. I need an answer. Rachel turned toward him. About what? Did Vanessa know about the guarantee? Rachel looked at me. Then Charles. Then the document. For the first time since she entered the room, she seemed to run out of explanations. Her shoulders dropped. No, she whispered. Mark stared at her. Know what? Rachel closed her eyes. She didn't know. The words landed harder than any denial. My daughter had finally admitted it. Not everything, but enough. Karen closed her folder. Charles looked devastated. Susan remained perfectly still beside me, and I sat there realizing something strange. For days I had believed hearing Rachel admit the truth would make me feel vindicated. It didn't. It made me feel like I had lost her. Charles spoke quietly. Rachel, we need the complete truth now. She wiped beneath one eye before the tear could fall. Then she looked at me. There was no executive confidence left in her face, no irritation, no embarrassment, only fear. Mom, she whispered, I can explain. A week earlier, those words might have saved her. Now they could only begin the confession. The truth, Rachel finally told. For several seconds after Rachel said, I can explain, nobody spoke. I watched my daughter sitting across from me, and for the first time in years, she looked young. Not 39, not like a director of operations, not like the polished woman who walked into rooms wearing expensive suits and talking about financing structures. She looked like the little girl who used to stand in my kitchen after breaking something and try to decide whether telling the truth would make things better or worse. Only this time what she had broken wasn't a lamp. It was trust. Charles folded his hands on the table. Then explain. Rachel looked at him, then at Mark. Finally, she looked at me. I never intended for Mom to lose anything. Susan shifted slightly beside me. I said nothing. Rachel continued. The Franklin project was going to work. Karen Wallace spoke calmly. That isn't the question. I know. Rachel rubbed her forehead. I know how this looks. Mark gave a humorless laugh. How it looks? Rachel ignored him. She looked at me again. Mom, Cooper Strategic Services was supposed to be my way into the project as more than an employee. I understand that now. I've spent years building projects that made money and opportunities for other people. Her voice gained strength as she spoke. I manage schedules. I solve problems. I sit in meetings with developers who earn more from one deal than I make in 5 years. I know how these projects work. So you wanted your own piece, I said. Yes. At least that answer was honest. Rachel explained that Mark had initially encouraged her to think about consulting independently. He believed her operational experience had value outside her salary. They began discussing the Franklin project after hours. Eventually, Rachel created Cooper Strategic Services. At first it was legitimate, she said quickly. Susan raised an eyebrow. At first, Rachel closed her eyes. I mean, the company was legitimate. And then Charles asked. Rachel stared at the table. Then the capital requirements became larger than I expected. How much did you have available? Karen asked. Rachel hesitated. Not enough. That isn't a number. About 40,000. I almost stopped breathing. She had committed to something requiring roughly $275,000 with 40,000 available. Mark stared at her. You told me you had access to family capital. I thought I could get it. From your mother? Rachel looked at me. Yes. Did you ask her? Mark's voice was harder now. Rachel said nothing. He answered for her. No. Rachel suddenly became defensive. You don't understand my mother. I almost laughed. Mark leaned back. I'm beginning to think neither did you. Rachel's face flushed. I knew she would never agree if I explained it in financial language. Because I would ask questions, I said. Because you're afraid of risk. Yes. I surprised everyone, including Rachel. Yes, I am afraid of risking the home your father and I spent 32 years paying for. That isn't what I meant. Then say what you mean. Rachel's eyes filled again. You've always believed safety is enough, and you decided that made my choices available to you. No. That is exactly what you did. She looked away. Charles brought the conversation back. Who created the guarantee? Rachel swallowed. I prepared the information. And the signature silence. Rachel. Her voice became almost inaudible. I copied it. I had known. Susan had known. Charles probably knew. But hearing my daughter say it still felt like a blade. From where I asked. She looked at me. One of the documents I photographed. The insurance form. I had been right. You sat in my house and copied my signature. Mom. Answer me. Yes. One word. 39 years of motherhood seemed to collapse into it. Why? Rachel started crying. Not delicately. Her face twisted and she covered her mouth with one hand. I thought it was temporary. I stared at her. A forged signature is temporary. The guarantee wasn't supposed to matter. Karen's expression hardened. Guarantees matter precisely when plans fail. I know that now. You knew it then, I said. Rachel shook her head. No, I knew technically. But Mark was confident. The projections were strong. The property had interest from tenants. I thought once we closed everything would move quickly. Mark interrupted. Do not put this on me. Rachel turned. You pushed me. I encouraged the investment because you told me the money existed. You kept saying opportunities don't wait. That doesn't mean forge your mother's signature. The room went silent again. Rachel looked as though he had struck her. For months I had imagined Mark as the powerful man influencing my daughter. Maybe he had encouraged her ambition. Maybe he had made recklessness sound sophisticated. But Susan had been right. He had not created Rachel's choices. Rachel had. I asked the question that mattered most. What was your plan? Rachel wiped her face. If the project closed, Cooper Strategic Services would receive consulting income. Once the commercial portion moved forward, the equity value would increase. I was going to refinance my position. And remove me, yes. When? As soon as I could. Without telling me, she hesitated. At first, I almost admired the honesty. And then I was going to tell you after everything was safe. I leaned back. So you were going to tell me after I could no longer say no. Rachel closed her eyes. Yes, there it was. The entire betrayal reduced to one sentence. My daughter had not wanted my agreement. She had wanted my assets. My agreement could come later, once it no longer mattered. Charles asked, did anyone at Whitmore know? Vanessa had not consented. No. Did Mark? Num. Mark looked away. Did anyone else help create the false signature? No. Susan finally spoke. And the authorization you gave Vanessa at lunch? Rachel looked at her. I needed legitimate verification before final funding. Because questions had been raised. Yes. And you represented those papers to Vanessa as insurance and estate documents. Rachel's face crumpled. Yes. I looked down at my hands. I had heard enough about how. I needed to understand why. Rachel looked at me. She did. Why was being successful worth this? She started to answer. I stopped her. Not the project. Not the money. Why did you become ashamed of where you came from? Her expression changed completely. For the first time, I had reached something deeper than the documents. Rachel stared at me. Then she whispered, "Because I got tired of being the person who didn't belong." My anger paused. She continued, "You don't know what those rooms are like." "No, I don't. People talk about summers in Europe. Their parents introduce them to investors. They inherit property. They know which schools everyone went to. They understand things I had to learn by watching. So, so I was always the girl whose mother did payroll and whose father fixed machines." I felt as if the air had left the room. Rachel immediately realized what she had said. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. No, you did." My voice was calm. "That's why Charles thought I was an investor." Rachel cried harder. "I wanted them to see me differently, by seeing me differently." She looked down. I thought about the holiday reception, the corrections, the way she scanned rooms when I visited her office. Suddenly all those tiny wounds had an explanation. Rachel wasn't merely trying to rise. She had been trying to erase the ladder. "My father fixed machines too," I said. Rachel looked at me. "He came home every night smelling like oil. Your father respected him." "I know. Daniel worked maintenance. I did payroll. We weren't ashamed." "I know." "Then why were you?" Rachel whispered. "Because I thought if they knew how ordinary we were, they'd know I was ordinary too." That hurt more than the forged signature. I reached for my water because my hands needed something to do. Charles looked down. Even Mark seemed uncomfortable. Then Rachel said the one thing I wasn't expecting. "Losing this deal isn't what scares me most." "What does?" She looked at me. "That you'll never believe me again." I didn't answer, because at that moment I didn't know whether I ever would. Charles cleared his throat. "There are employment consequences we'll need to address separately." Rachel nodded without looking at him. Then he turned toward me. "There's also the issue of the forged guarantee." Susan looked at me too. Charles continued carefully. "Vanessa Whitmore will cooperate with whatever process is required, but whether you personally choose to pursue further legal action regarding the unauthorized use of your signature is something you need to discuss with your attorney." Rachel's face went pale. For the first time, the power in the room shifted completely. Not to Charles, not to the lender, not to Susan, to me. Rachel had spent months making decisions about my name, my property, and my future without asking me. Now there was one decision she could not make. What happened next? She looked at me through tears. "Mom." I held up my hand. "Don't ask me to save you." She closed her mouth. I stood. My knees felt weak, but my voice did not. "I have spent your entire life trying to protect you from pain." Rachel began crying again. "But maybe protecting you from consequences is how we got here." I picked up my purse. "I need time." Then I walked out of the conference room before my daughter could ask me for the one thing I was no longer willing to give automatically. Rescue. I wouldn't save her from the consequences. I drove home from Whitmore without turning on the radio. Usually silence in the car made me uncomfortable. Daniel had always kept something playing, old soul music, baseball talk radio, anything to fill the space. That afternoon, I needed the silence. Rachel's words kept repeating in my head. "I thought if they knew how ordinary we were, they'd know I was ordinary too." I had spent nearly 40 years believing I had given my daughter something to be proud of. Apparently, somewhere along the way, she had decided our life was something she needed to escape. When I reached home, I sat in the driveway for several minutes. The brick looked faded in places. The porch railing needed paint. One shutter had been slightly crooked since a storm the previous spring. Ordinary. Rachel had been right about that much. It was an ordinary house, built with ordinary wages, paid for with ordinary paychecks, protected by two ordinary people who got up every morning and went to work, and I had never loved it more. Inside, I made tea and carried it to Daniel's chair. I didn't cry. I had cried enough. What I felt now was heavier. Responsibility. Because Charles had been right. The next decision belonged to me. Part of me wanted Rachel frightened. I'm ashamed to admit that. I wanted her to feel what I had felt when I saw my property listed in those documents. I wanted her to understand what it was like to discover someone you trusted had made plans for your life without you. But wanting someone to understand pain is not the same as wanting revenge. That distinction mattered. Susan called around 5. How are you? I don't know yet. That's fair. What happens now, with the financing, with everything? She explained that the lender would formally reject my participation, and the existing financing structure would have to be withdrawn or substantially rebuilt. Cooper Strategic Services no longer had the financial backing Rachel had represented. Without that backing, its role in the deal was effectively finished. And Rachel's job, that is Whitmore's decision. I knew what that meant. Charles is going to fire her. I can't speak for him. But you think so? Susan was silent. That was answer enough. Then she addressed the harder issue. Vanessa, we need to discuss whether you want to make a formal complaint regarding the forged signature. My stomach tightened. What would happen? I can't promise an outcome. There could be civil consequences, possibly further investigation, depending on what authorities or institutions determine. I closed my eyes. Could she go to jail? I'm not going to speculate. That frightened me more than a yes would have. What would you do? Susan answered immediately. I'm your attorney. I'm not your conscience. That's inconvenient. She gave a small laugh. I know. Then her voice softened. You don't have to decide tonight. After we hung up, I walked through the house. Rachel's childhood was everywhere if I knew where to look. A faint pencil mark inside the pantry where Daniel measured her height. A tiny scratch on the hallway floor from roller skates she wasn't supposed to wear indoors. A ceramic bowl she made in 8th grade art class. How do you separate the adult who betrayed you from the child you loved? You don't. That was the problem. They were the same person. The next morning, Charles called. His voice was tired. Rachel's employment with Whitmore has ended. I sat down. Did she resign? No. I closed my eyes. Charles continued. We determined there were undisclosed conflicts of interest and serious problems with documentation submitted in connection with the project. Did you tell people what she did? Only those who need to know. Thank you. Vanessa. I'm sorry. You didn't do this. No. But I hired her. I trusted her. So did I. Neither of us spoke for a moment. What happens to the Franklin project will restructure. It may be delayed, but the project itself is bigger than any one person. That gave me strange comfort. Affordable homes would still be built. Neighborhood businesses might still open. Rachel's mistake did not have to destroy everything around her, only the illusion she had created. Later that afternoon, Mark called me. I almost didn't answer. Mrs. Cooper. Yes, I owe you an apology. For what? For believing things about you without ever confirming them with you. I appreciated that. He told me he had withdrawn from his arrangement with Cooper Strategic Services. He had also ended his personal relationship with Rachel. You don't need to tell me that. I thought you should know. I felt protective of her immediately. Did you leave her because the money disappeared? He was quiet. No. I left because I realized I didn't know who I was doing business with. The sentence hurt, but I couldn't argue with it. 2 days passed before Rachel called. I let it ring. Then she called again. And again. Finally, I answered. Mom. Her voice was raw. Can I come over? I nearly said no. Instead, I said tomorrow, 10 o'clock. She arrived 9 minutes early. No luxury SUV. A rideshare dropped her at the curb. She walked up my driveway wearing jeans, a plain blouse, and no makeup. I opened the door. For the first time since she was a teenager, Rachel looked uncertain about whether she was welcome in her childhood home. Come in. She sat at the kitchen table. Neither of us touched the coffee I made. I lost my job, she said. I know. Mark left. I know that too. The project is gone. Your part in it is. Her eyes flashed. So you've been talking to everyone. I heard the accusation, and something inside me became very calm. Yes, Rachel. People have been talking to me because you put my name into a business transaction. She looked away. I've lost everything. No. She stared at me. I lost my career. You lost a job. My reputation is ruined, maybe damaged. My relationship is over. That hurts. I'm sorry. She looked almost offended by my calmness. Then the anger came. If you had just signed the documents at lunch, none of this would have happened. There it was. The sentence that decided everything for me. I leaned forward. Say that again. Rachel froze. You still think my refusal caused this? I didn't mean you forged my signature. Tears appeared in her eyes. I know. You used my house to strengthen financing I never approved. I know. You lied to your employer, your lender Mark and me. She covered her face. I know. And somehow you are sitting here telling me that signing the papers would have prevented the problem. Rachel started crying. I'm scared. I know. I have bills. I know. I don't know what I'm going to do. There it was, the opening. For 39 years, that sentence had activated something in me. I don't know what I'm going to do. It meant Mom steps in. Mom writes the check. Mom makes the call. Mom finds the solution. Not this time. I'm not paying your debts. Rachel lowered her hands. I didn't ask. You were going to. Her silence told me I was right. I'm not refinancing anything for you. You cannot move your debts into my name. You cannot use my house. And you will never again have unsupervised access to my financial records. Her face crumpled. You really don't trust me? No. The word hurt us both. But I love you. Rachel stared at me. I don't understand how both can be true. They have to be. I took a breath. I spoke with Susan. Fear entered her face. About pressing charges. About my options. Rachel became completely still. I have decided that I will not pursue the harshest legal response available to me, provided you cooperate fully. Her lips trembled. What does that mean? You correct every false representation. You provide whatever documentation is required. You do not lie about my involvement. You do not destroy anything. And you accept the consequences that already exist. She began crying again. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She looked up. I am not doing this because what you did was small. I know. I'm doing it because I don't want revenge. She nodded. But forgiveness is not the same as rescue. Rachel wiped her face. I understand. I don't think you do yet. I stood and walked to the window. Daniel's porch railing cast a shadow across the lawn. Then I turned back. You said I destroyed your life by refusing to sign. I was upset. You need to understand something. I looked directly at my daughter. No, Rachel. I stopped you from using mine to build yours. She closed her eyes. This time she didn't argue. For the first time since the certified letter arrived, Rachel accepted the sentence without defending herself. She left an hour later. I watched her walk down the driveway alone. I wanted to call her back. I wanted to put money in her hand. I wanted to tell her everything would be fine. Instead, I let her go. That may have been the hardest thing I ever did as her mother. Because when our children are small, love means catching them before they fall. But when they become adults, sometimes love means refusing to stand underneath every consequence. Rachel had fallen. I could still love her from where I stood. But this time, she would have to learn how to get back up herself. The silence between us. For the first few weeks after Rachel lost her job, I checked my phone more often than I care to admit. Every time it vibrated, some part of me hoped it was her. Another part was relieved when it wasn't. That was the uncomfortable truth about loving someone after they betray you. You miss them, and you miss the safety of not hearing from them. Both feelings can exist at the same time. Rachel and I did not have some dramatic final argument after the morning in my kitchen. There was no slammed door, no declaration that we would never speak again. There was simply silence. At first she sent short messages. I'm okay. Meeting with an attorney tomorrow. Selling some things. I answered politely. Take care of yourself. Let me know you're safe. But I did not ask whether she needed money. That was deliberate. For almost 39 years I had interpreted Rachel's problems as invitations. If she was short on rent in college, I sent money. If her car needed repairs, Daniel and I helped. If she was overwhelmed, I organized. If she was heartbroken, I listened. That was motherhood to me. But I had finally learned that helping automatically can become its own kind of damage. Rachel needed to experience her life without my financial security standing behind it. About 6 weeks after the Whitmore meeting, she sold her luxury SUV. I learned because she texted me. Sold the car today. I stared at the message for several seconds before replying. That must have been difficult. Her answer came quickly. It was. Then I should have bought a Honda like you told me. I laughed. Actually laughed. It was the first time anything connected to Rachel had made me laugh in weeks. I wrote your father would say Toyota. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, I miss him. I put the phone down and cried. Not because the message was profound, because it was the first time Rachel had spoken about Daniel without turning the memory into something practical. No inheritance, no house, no documents, just her father. 2 months later, Rachel moved out of her condominium. She didn't ask to move in with me. That mattered. I learned later that she rented a small one-bedroom apartment outside Charlotte. Nothing fashionable, nothing impressive. She found work with a non-profit housing organization in Gastonia. The position was several levels below her former title. No director of operations, no executive meetings, no major development deals. She coordinated vendors and assisted with property operations. When she finally told me, she sounded embarrassed. It's not much. I surprised myself by becoming angry. Don't say that. What don't call honest work not much. Silence. Then Rachel whispered, "You're right." That was new. The old Rachel would have defended herself. This Rachel seemed to be listening. I was changing too. Susan introduced me to a community program that offered financial education for older adults. At first I attended because she thought I might benefit from hearing how other families handled financial boundaries. Instead, I discovered they needed volunteers. One afternoon, the coordinator asked about my background. Payroll and bookkeeping, I said. For years I had watched Rachel shrink that career into something small. The coordinator's face lit up. That's exactly the kind of experience we need. I nearly laughed. I started volunteering twice a month. We helped older adults understand suspicious financial requests, unauthorized account changes, powers of attorney guarantees, and family pressure. The stories were different. The emotions were not. A 74-year-old woman whose grandson kept asking for access to her checking account. A widower pressured to co-sign a car loan. A retired teacher whose son wanted her to mortgage her house to save his restaurant. Again and again I heard the same sentence. But he's family. Or, she would never hurt me. I never told them what to do. I simply asked questions. Do you understand what you are signing? Can you afford to lose the money? Would you agree if the person asking were not related to you? Does helping them require risking your own security? Those questions were useful. Maybe because I had learned them painfully. One afternoon after a workshop, a woman named Evelyn stayed behind. My daughter says if I loved her, I'd trust her. I felt the words in my chest. I sat beside her. Trust doesn't require blindness. Evelyn looked at me. I continued. Anyone who loves you should want you to understand before you agree. That evening, driving home, I realized something. Rachel had taken my experience and turned it into shame. Now I was turning it into usefulness. That felt like getting part of myself back. The months passed. Rachel and I spoke occasionally. Never long, never deeply. She told me about work. I told her about volunteering. We avoided the Franklin Project. We avoided Mark. We avoided the forged signature. Sometimes healing begins with avoiding the wound until both people can touch it without making it bleed again. Then almost 5 months after the meeting at Whitmore, I found an envelope in my mailbox. My name was handwritten. I recognized Rachel's writing immediately. For a moment I couldn't open it. The last important envelope connected to my daughter had nearly cost me my home. I carried this one into the kitchen. No certified mail sticker. No lender. No company name. Just my daughter's handwriting. Inside were 4 pages. Mom, I'm writing because every time I try to say this out loud, I start explaining instead of apologizing. I stopped. That first sentence told me more than all the apologies Rachel had offered before. She understood the difference. I continued reading. She wrote about losing Whitmore, selling the car, leaving the condo. Mark, the humiliation of applying for jobs after people in her professional circle learned enough about the situation to stop returning calls. But she did not blame me. Not once. Then I reached the paragraph that broke me. Losing my career hurt. Losing Mark hurt. Losing the life I thought I was building hurt. But none of those things hurt as much as realizing I had become ashamed of the woman who sacrificed so I could have that career in the first place. My vision blurred. I kept reading. You and Dad gave me everything you could without risking what you needed. Instead of respecting that, I started comparing you to people who had more money. I confused wealth with worth. Then I became so afraid of looking ordinary that I treated the two people who made me who I am as if being ordinary was something shameful. I covered my mouth. Daniel should have been there to read it. Rachel wrote about the holiday reception. She remembered interrupting me when I talked about payroll. She remembered looking embarrassed when I brought lunch to her office. She remembered telling me not to call during work. I thought protecting my image made me look successful. Now I understand that anyone worth impressing would have respected where I came from. Then came the sentence I needed most. I am not asking you to trust me again. I read it twice. I hope someday I earn some of it back. But I know I don't get to decide when that happens. There was no request for money. No request to move home. No request for me to speak to Charles. No excuse. At the end she wrote, I love you. I'm sorry I made your love for me into something I thought I was entitled to use. Rachel. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I took the letter into the living room and placed it beside the photograph of the three of us at Rachel's promotion ceremony. For months that picture had represented everything false about the life Rachel had built. That evening I saw it differently. The happiness in that photograph had been real. So was the betrayal that came later. Human beings are difficult that way. We want people to be entirely good or entirely bad because it makes decisions easier. Rachel had done something deeply wrong. She was also my daughter. Forgiveness would not erase either truth. I did not call her that night. I needed to know whether the letter still felt sincere after the emotion settled. The next morning I read it again, then again after lunch. 3 days later, I finally called. Rachel answered on the second ring. Mom. Her voice sounded frightened. I got your letter. Silence. Okay, I believe you meant it. She began crying. So do I said. What I realized, I was crying too. I love you too. She took a shaky breath. Does that mean we're okay? There was the old temptation. Say yes. Make the pain disappear. Give my child reassurance. Instead, I told her the truth. No. We're not okay yet. Rachel was silent. But maybe we can become okay. Another shaky breath. I'd like that. So would I. We agreed to start counseling together. Slowly. No promises about how quickly trust would return. No pretending the past had disappeared. After we hung up, I stood beside the kitchen window. My phone remained in my hand. Months earlier, I had been afraid to call my own daughter because she had made me feel like an interruption in her important life. Now Rachel was learning something both of us should have understood long ago. Love does not mean unlimited access. Forgiveness does not mean restored trust. And boundaries do not mean the relationship is over. Sometimes boundaries are the only reason a relationship has a chance to begin again. This time I called her at work. Almost a year after the certified letter arrived, I stood in my kitchen staring at Rachel's name on my phone. The irony was not lost on me. I needed to call my daughter. During work. For months, those 3 words had carried more weight than they deserved. During work. Once they had meant that Rachel's world was too important for me to interrupt. That my voice belonged after business hours. That my ordinary life should wait outside the polished doors of hers. Now I simply stood there wondering whether I should press the button. A great deal had changed in 11 months. Rachel was still working for the housing nonprofit in Gastonia. She had been offered a slightly better position after 6 months, but she turned it down initially because she said she wanted to learn the organization properly before accepting more responsibility. When she told me that, I nearly asked who had replaced my daughter with this sensible woman. Instead, I said your father would approve. She laughed. He'd probably tell me to read the boring part of the job description. Yes, he would. Rachel's life was smaller now, at least according to the measurements she once used. Her apartment was smaller. Her paycheck was smaller. Her car was a 7-year-old Toyota. Daniel would have enjoyed that victory immensely. She no longer belonged to the private club. She stopped eating at restaurants where dinner cost more than my weekly grocery bill. But something strange happened as Rachel's life became less impressive. She became easier to recognize. She called me on Sunday mornings, not because she needed something, just to talk. Sometimes she asked what I was cooking. Sometimes she complained about laundry. Sometimes we spoke about Daniel. Counseling helped, although I hated the first few sessions. Our counselor, Dr. Melissa Grant, refused to let either of us hide behind comfortable language. Rachel would say, I made a bad financial decision. Dr. Grant would ask which decision Rachel would have to say it. I forged my mother's signature. I would say, I'm trying to move on. Dr. Grant would ask, does moving on mean trusting Rachel? And I would have to admit, no. Those conversations hurt. They also prevented us from building reconciliation on top of another lie. Rachel eventually stopped asking when I would trust her again. Instead, she began behaving like someone who understood trust was not a deadline. When she helped me with anything involving money, she made sure I saw every page. If she needed information, she explained why. If I said no, she accepted it. Small things. But trust is made from small things. So is betrayal. My own life had changed too. The financial literacy program expanded its workshops. What began as 2 volunteer afternoons a month became something I genuinely loved. I helped create a simple presentation for older adults called Before You Sign. We taught people to recognize pressure disguised as urgency. We explained guarantees. We talked about family members requesting passwords. We encouraged people to ask independent questions before mixing love and money. At first, I never told participants why the subject mattered so much to me. Eventually, I started sharing a shortened version. My daughter once used my financial information without my permission, I would say. I never gave Rachel's name. I never humiliated her. I simply told people what I had learned. One Tuesday morning, the program director, Linda Morales, asked me to stay after a workshop. She closed the conference room door and smiled. You know we're expanding. I heard. We're forming an advisory board. That sounds sensible. We want you on it. I laughed. Linda didn't. I'm serious. Linda, I'm a retired payroll supervisor. Exactly. I don't have nonprofit governance experience. You have 34 years of financial administration experience, and you understand the people we serve. I didn't know what to say. A year earlier, Rachel had turned me into a fictional private investor because apparently the truth about me wasn't impressive enough. Now someone was looking directly at that truth and calling it valuable. When do you need an answer? Take a few days. I smiled. I already know. Linda raised an eyebrow. Yes. Driving home. I thought about Daniel. I wished I could tell him. Then I thought about Rachel. My first instinct was to call her. I reached for my phone at a red light, then stopped. It was 2:17. Rachel would be working. The old sentence came back immediately. Mom, please stop calling me while I'm at work. My happiness shrank. That irritated me. Why was I still giving one sentence that much power? Rachel had apologized. She had changed. We were rebuilding. Still, old wounds are strange. They can stop hurting without disappearing. When I got home, I put groceries away, made tea, checked the mail. I tried to wait until 5. At 3:12, I became annoyed with myself. This is ridiculous, Vanessa. The kitchen offered no disagreement. I picked up my phone and called Rachel. She answered on the third ring. Mom, my heart tightened. Hi. Is everything okay? Yes. I'm sorry. I forgot you're working. The apology came automatically. I can call later. No. I stopped. Rachel's voice softened. No, Mom. Don't hang up. I don't want to interrupt. You're not. You might be busy. I am. I smiled faintly. Then I'll call tonight. Mom. Something in her voice stopped me. You never have to be afraid to call me again. I closed my eyes. Rachel continued. If I'm in a meeting, I may not answer. If I'm busy, I might call back. But I never want you sitting there wondering whether you're allowed to call your daughter. Tears came before I could stop them. I wasn't afraid. Rachel laughed gently. Yes, you were. All right. Maybe a little. I'm sorry I did that to you. I leaned against the counter. I know. There was no need for another speech. That was another thing we had learned. Sometimes an apology does not need to be repeated forever. Sometimes it simply needs to remain true. So Rachel said what happened. I smiled. The financial literacy program asked me to join its advisory board. Silence. For one terrible second, I wondered whether the call had dropped. Then Rachel said, Mom. What? That's incredible. Her excitement sounded so genuine that I started crying harder. Oh, don't make a fuss. I'm making a fuss. It's just an advisory board. I laughed. You sound like me. I was about to say the same thing. Then her voice changed. Pride entered it. Real pride. I'm proud of you. Those 4 words reached a place inside me I hadn't realized was still wounded. I thought about the Whitmore Christmas reception. Rachel interrupting me when I said I worked in payroll. Rachel explaining me away. Rachel looking around the lobby when I brought her lunch. For years I had wanted her to be proud of me. Then I learned something better. I didn't need her pride in order to respect myself. That was probably why hearing it now meant so much. Thank you, I whispered. You're going to be wonderful. I haven't done anything yet. You've been doing it your whole life. I laughed. Now you're exaggerating. No. Rachel paused. You taught me more about money than anyone I ever met. I just spent years trying not to listen. That sounds expensive. She laughed. Very. We spoke for another 5 minutes. Then Rachel said she really did have to return to work. Call me tonight, she asked. I will. And Mom. Yes, I mean it. Call whenever you need me. After we hung up, I remained standing in the kitchen. Nothing dramatic had happened. No executive had entered the room. No documents had been exposed. No financial deal had collapsed. Just a mother calling her daughter. But sometimes the smallest moments show you how far you have traveled. That evening, Rachel came over with takeout to celebrate. We ate on the porch Daniel had built. The railing had finally been repainted. Rachel looked across the yard. Dad would be proud of you. I think so. Then she smiled. He'd probably tell everyone he predicted this. He absolutely would. We laughed. After a while, Rachel became quiet. Mom. Yes. Do you forgive me? It was the first time she had asked directly in months. I thought carefully. Yes. Her eyes filled. But forgiveness doesn't mean I trust you the way I did before. I know. And maybe I never will in exactly the same way. She nodded. I know that too. I reached across and took her hand. But that doesn't mean what we have now is less valuable. Rachel looked at me. It's different. Yes. Maybe more honest. I squeezed her hand. Definitely more honest. We sat there until the evening light faded. I thought about the woman I had been when this began. The woman staring at a certified letter while apologizing for bothering her daughter. I wanted to reach backward through time and tell her something. You are not difficult because you ask questions. You are not selfish because you protect what you earned. You are not an embarrassment because your life is ordinary. And love does not require surrendering your voice. Rachel had wanted so desperately to become extraordinary that she nearly destroyed the ordinary things that mattered most. A mother who loved her, a home built over decades, a reputation earned honestly, the ability to look people in the eye without hiding anything. She lost much of what she thought made her successful. But slowly, painfully, she found something better. Integrity. And I found something too. My voice. A year earlier, my daughter told me to stop calling her during work because I embarrassed her. That same afternoon, her boss called me and uncovered the lie that changed both our lives. But that wasn't the ending. The ending came nearly a year later when I called Rachel at work again. This time she didn't make me feel small. She made sure I knew I had a place in her life. And for the first time, neither of us needed to pretend that love meant everything was forgotten. We simply understood that some relationships do not return to what they were. They become something new, something slower, something wiser, something built not on blind trust, but on truth. And sometimes that is the strongest kind of love we can build. Ket Thuk Fan 15. I used to believe being a good mother meant making life easier for my child. Now I know that love and rescue are not the same thing. There are moments when helping someone means standing beside them. There are other moments when helping means refusing to carry consequences that belong to them. Rachel was my daughter when she succeeded. She was still my daughter when she betrayed me. And she remained my daughter when I refused to save her. That may be the hardest lesson parenthood ever teaches us. Loving someone does not give them ownership of our money, our homes, our identities, or our dignity. Family should never require you to stop asking questions. If someone pressures you to sign quickly, tells you that you are too old to understand, or says trust means you should not need an explanation. Remember this: genuine love can survive a question, and genuine trust does not fear transparency. I also learned that forgiveness is not a reset button. I forgave Rachel, but I did not pretend the forged signature never existed. Trust had to be rebuilt through small choices repeated over time. That did not make me cruel. It made our new relationship honest. And perhaps the most important thing I learned was this: an ordinary life is not a failed life. Daniel and I never became wealthy developers or powerful executives. We worked ordinary jobs, paid our bills, protected our home, and raised a daughter we loved. There is dignity in that. There always was. If you were in my place, would you have forgiven Rachel? Would you have confronted her immediately, or waited until that conference room meeting? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story reminded you of something you have experienced in your own family, I'd love to hear your perspective. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about family betrayal, boundaries, forgiveness, and finding your strength later in life speak to you, please like this video and subscribe. And remember, you can love someone deeply without handing them the keys to everything you worked your whole life to protect. Dahuan Tut Kichban. What Vanessa learned is something many of us only understand after being hurt by someone we love. Love should never require us to surrender our dignity, our judgment, or the security we spent a lifetime building. For years, Vanessa believed being a good mother meant helping whenever her daughter struggled. She sacrificed, encouraged, forgave, and made herself available because that was how she understood love. But there is an important difference between supporting someone and rescuing them from every consequence. When we repeatedly protect the people we love from the results of their own choices, we may unintentionally teach them that our boundaries will always disappear when they need something. Rachel's greatest mistake was not simply forging a signature. It was believing her mother's love gave her permission to make decisions about Vanessa's life without Vanessa's consent. And Vanessa's greatest act of love was not forgiving Rachel in the end. It was finally saying no. Sometimes no is not rejection. Sometimes no means I love you, but I will not let you destroy yourself by using me. Vanessa also discovered that forgiveness and trust are two different things. We can forgive someone without pretending the betrayal never happened. We can love them while requiring boundaries. We can open the door to reconciliation without handing them the same key they once misused. Trust does not return because someone apologizes. It returns slowly through honesty, accountability, and consistent actions. And perhaps the most beautiful lesson is that there is nothing shameful about an ordinary life built honestly. A modest home, decades of hard work, bills paid on time, sacrifices made quietly, and a family loved faithfully may never impress a room full of wealthy strangers. But those things represent something money cannot purchase: character. Never allow anyone, not even your own family, to make you feel small because you choose security over appearances, caution over pressure, or self-respect over approval. If Vanessa's story touched you, tell me in the comments. Could you have forgiven Rachel after what she did? And have you ever had to set a painful boundary with someone you deeply loved? Share your thoughts below. Your experience may be exactly what another person reading the comments needs.